In the brutal calculus of war, there was a grim saying whispered among soldiers of fortune: a mercenary who doesn't die is third-rate. On a blood-soaked field under a bruised twilight sky, crows circled over the grim tableau of battle. An army stood silhouetted against the dying sun, their forms grim and weary, the air thick with the scent of iron and the silence of the fallen. A mercenary's value was measured not in victories, but in their willingness to perish. This was the justification for their high pay, a covenant sealed in coin, paid for in blood. A knight in battered armor held his sword, its blade stained from the grim work of the day, a testament to the price of loyalty. This was the ultimate contract, to die for their masters, a final, fatal service rendered without question. The mercenary captain, Jake, had heard this empty philosophy from employers every single day of his life, a constant reminder of his expendable nature. Resigned to the harsh realities of his profession, he poured out the last of his flask onto the scorched earth, a final tribute to fallen comrades. There was nothing more to be said. It was simply the life of a mercenary. Standing on the crumbling parapet of a fortress engulfed in flames, Jake stared out at the encroaching darkness. He spoke to the commander behind him, his voice laced with the weary cynicism of a man who had seen too much betrayal. He thought of all the nobles he had served, men who were all exactly the same in their duplicity. He recalled their predictable patterns, how they would offer up land and titles when their backs were against the wall, making grand promises to secure his blade. But once the danger passed, their tune would invariably change, replacing gratitude with creative excuses and insults. But what this commander had just proposed, that was something else entirely. Jake turned, a disbelieving smirk playing on his lips as he faced the stoic commander. He had to have misheard. The request was too absurd, too contrary to the unspoken rules of their arrangement. He looked past the commander, down the long stretch of the castle wall, as if searching for an answer in the smoky air. Could the commander-in-chief truly be asking this of him? The commander, a man of noble bearing with fiery red hair, met his gaze without flinching. His expression was a mask of cold resolve as he confirmed the mercenary's deepest fears. He had not misheard. The order was simple, direct, and utterly final. He had just been told to die. A dry, humorless laugh escaped Jake's lips. The sheer audacity of the command was almost comical. He questioned if the commander had forgotten who he was, the leader of a renowned and feared mercenary band. The commander acknowledged him by name and title, Jake, captain of the Fong mercenaries, making it clear this was no mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated order. Jake's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, his amusement vanishing into cold indignation. He found it darkly humorous that this noble would ask a disposable mercenary, a man paid to kill without honor, to fight and die with the glory of a noble knight. The hypocrisy was a bitter pill to swallow, a final insult from a class that had always looked down on him. The commander's expression softened slightly, a flicker of what might have been remorse in his eyes. He conceded that perhaps he had gotten ahead of himself, and he apologized if he had given the wrong impression. It was not a call for a glorious death, he explained, but merely a final mission he wished to entrust to Jake. He then laid bare the hopelessness of their situation. Their repeated defeats had sealed their fate, and the city below was being consumed by the fires of the rebellion. The enemy's blades were at the throat of the Crawford family, the noble guardians of this land. There was no victory to be had, only an inevitable and bloody end. The commander admitted that the stark realization of having nowhere left to run had made him ramble. Jake listened, a careless smile on his face, but his mind was already calculating his next move. This was it, he thought, the perfect time to bail. If a man with the commander's legendary talent was cornered like this, the war was well and truly over. Jake mused internally that it was a shame. The commander was a decent man, for a noble, but a final mission in this chaos? He assumed it was a simple task, like scouting a retreat path. It would be one last chore before collecting his final pay and disappearing into the night. But the commander's words shattered his assumptions. The rebels were launching an all-out offensive at dawn, and the mission was to stand with him and hold them off. It was a suicide charge, a delaying tactic to buy just enough time for his lord to escape. Or, if that wasn't possible, to fight until they were both dead. As a final incentive, the commander presented a magnificent red gem, promising it was enough to cover 3 years of the mercenary corps' operating costs. But before he could finish his sentence, Jake's hand shot out like a whip, striking the commander's gauntlet and sending the priceless gem skittering across the stone floor. The commander stared, stunned into silence by the blatant act of defiance. Jake's voice was a low growl. "That's my line," he seethed, his jovial mask completely gone, replaced by a visage of pure fury. He snarled, questioning if the commander mistook his constant smiling for foolishness. His orders were nothing but a command to become meat shields, to be thrown away to buy a few pathetic seconds for a lord who had already lost. Jake painted a grim picture of their fate. Even if they miraculously held out, the rebels would show them no mercy. Their kind were not taken prisoner. The commander, still trying to appeal to duty, reminded Jake that they were mercenaries, not knights, as if their lives held less value. This distinction, however, was precisely Jake's point. With a savage grin, Jake explained the battlefield reality. The enemy knew the commander was the prize. Once he was dead, they wouldn't waste time chasing mercenaries. He then revealed the true stakes. To the approaching rebels, the Fong mercenaries were not just hired swords, but a sworn enemy they yearned to destroy. A grim memory surfaced, a forest clearing littered with the armored bodies of their foes. In the flashback, a rebel soldier coughed, drawing the attention of his superior. As the leader moved to help the man, the soldier's hand shot out, a blade flashing in the dim light. It was an ambush. The fallen soldiers rose from the ground, their feigned deaths a cruel ruse, and the forest erupted in a storm of steel and blood. The rebel leader, seeing his men cut down by the disguised mercenaries, could only scream in outrage. The eye of the assassin, Jake, stared back from behind a stolen helmet, cold and merciless. The leader reeled back on his horse, horrified by the trap, realizing these were not his men, but the infamous Fong mercenaries. The man bellowed, his face contorted in disbelief and rage, questioning if they had any honor at all. In response, Jake's blade flashed through the air, silencing him forever. The rebel leader's head fell to the forest floor, a testament to the mercenary captain's brutal pragmatism. Returning to the present, Jake's eyes glinted with the memory of countless such victories. He had cut the throats of commanders just like this one, and that ruthless pragmatism was the only reason his men had survived so long. He grabbed the commander's armor, emphasizing that right now, rebel soldiers were dying in droves just for a chance to get to him, held back only by the mercenaries they sought to use as cannon fodder. A horrifying realization dawned on Jake. The commander's plan was far more cunning and far more cruel than he had imagined. It wasn't about a shared, noble sacrifice. He was meant to be the bait to draw the enemy's attention. The commander's cold gaze confirmed it, as he simply stated his hope that Jake would carry out his mission. A chilling threat hung in the air. If Jake refused, the commander would have no choice but to cut him down and seize command of the mercenaries himself. With a surge of strength, he hurled Jake across the stone rooftop, his intentions brutally clear. There was no negotiation, only obedience or death. Jake landed hard, his body aching but his spirit burning with rage. He had held a sliver of hope that this commander was different from the other nobles he'd known. Now he saw the truth. He was the absolute worst of them all, willing to sacrifice anyone and everyone for his master's sake. The commander offered a sincere, yet hollow, apology, but Jake cut him off, a new, dangerous plan forming in his mind. This development worked out perfectly, he mused, taking the head of a man like this and offering it to the rebels camped outside. That was a task he could perform without a trace of guilt. The commander, unfazed, calmly deduced Jake's intent, to offer his head in exchange for the mercenaries' lives. Jake admitted that he'd love nothing more, but he was no fool. He knew the commander had already taken measures to ensure none of them could escape the fortress. They were trapped. In that case, Jake declared, he had only one path left. As their captain, He had a duty to do everything in his power for his men until the very end. The rebels wanted a commander's head? Fine. He would give them two, the commander's and his own. In exchange, the rest of his men would go free. The commander was taken aback. He hadn't anticipated this selfless maneuver. Jake explained that he had dragged his men into this life on a selfish whim, with a promise that they could achieve their dreams, even starting from the gutter. They had trusted him, followed him this far, and now he had to take responsibility for their lives. He drew his sword, the spectral figures of his mercenary corps rising behind him like ghosts of loyalty. His resolve was absolute, his purpose clear. He was doing this because he was the captain. The weight of that title, that promise, was all that mattered now. A soft laugh escaped the commander's lips, not of mockery, but of genuine, weary respect. He finally understood. This was what it truly meant to be a leader, a concept so foreign to the nobles he served. He looked at the mercenary, a man of low birth, but possessing a spirit greater than any king. The commander's hand went to his own throat, a gesture of profound regret. "What a shame," he murmured, his voice filled with a sorrow that transcended their conflict. In that moment, he wished that Jake, not Crawford, had been the liege he had sworn his life to protect. But fate had already drawn their battle lines. With no more words to be said, the two warriors charged. Steel met steel in a clash that echoed across the burning battlements. Jake fought with the desperation of a man protecting his family, but the commander moved with the flawless grace of a master swordsman, his skill honed by a lifetime of elite training. The commander's blade found its mark, and Jake was thrown backward, blood erupting from his chest. He staggered, looking at his opponent with a mix of awe and resignation. He had seen this coming, but he never imagined the gap in their abilities would be this massive. The sheer, accursed talent of the noble-born was a wall he could not surmount. Even as his life force drained away, a faint smile touched Jake's lips. This was fine. He had done all he could, and now he could die in peace. He had always been prepared for this end, to fall on a forgotten battlefield. Yet, as the world began to fade, one final, lingering question surfaced in his mind. If he had been born with the same opportunities, the same noble blood and privileged upbringing as the man who defeated him, he wondered just how high he could have climbed. The thought hung in the darkness of his fading consciousness, a final, bittersweet regret as his life slipped away into nothingness. From the depths of that abyss, a voice called out, distant at first, then growing clearer. "Master, please wake up." The darkness gave way to a brilliant, warm light. A young man with orange hair stood over a bed, his face a mask of desperate concern, pleading for the person lying there to awaken. The person in the bed, whose last sensation was a cold blade in his chest, stirred. His eyes, once Jake's, fluttered open. As the attendant leaned closer, shouting for him to wake up, an instinct honed by 100 battles took over. A hand shot out, striking the young man across the face with a sharp crack. A gasp of pain and surprise filled the room. Confusion swamped his senses. Did he just get slapped? No, he was the one who had struck out. He stared at the tearful attendant, who, clutching his reddened cheek, cried out a name that meant nothing to him. Young Master Lucian. Lucian, formerly Jake, pushed himself up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The opulent room, the soft bed, the strange boy calling him master. None of it made sense. His mind was a whirlwind of fire, blood, and a final, fatal duel. He could only stare, a single, bewildered word forming on his lips. What? Lucian, formerly the mercenary Jake, sat up in the lavish bed, a deep, unsettling feeling washing over him. It felt as if his very soul was misplaced, an unease that went bone deep. He looked down at his own hands, his expression twisting from confusion to utter disbelief at the sight of them. His mind reeled, searching for the familiar landscape of his own body, the calloused skin, the myriad of scars that told the story of 100 battles. But there was nothing. Instead, he stared at the smooth, unblemished hands of a young nobleman, so pristine and unused to hardship they might as well have belonged to a stranger. His attention was pulled away by the sound of weeping. The young attendant, who had been trying to wake him just moments ago, was now clutching the bedsheets and sobbing uncontrollably. The sudden shift from concern to wailing only deepened Lucian's disorientation. Who was this boy, and why was he acting so erratically? Through a torrent of tears and snot, the attendant cried out in relief, exclaiming that he thought the young master had passed away. His words were a chaotic jumble of fear and joy, speaking of his own potential execution and the tragedy it would have been for the family. None of it made a lick of sense to Lucian, whose confusion was rapidly turning to alarm. Lucian's mind raced, trying to parse the boy's frantic words. Young master? Personal servant? Family? These were concepts from a life he had never known, a world away from the grit and blood of his own. But one fact remained, sharp and certain amidst the fog. He had most definitely died. The memory was absolute. A fatal wound, a final duel, a life extinguished so completely that no one could have saved him. How, then, was he here? In a surge of panicked instinct, his hand flew to his neck, his fingers searching for the mortal wound he remembered. He was bewildered to find nothing but smooth, unbroken skin. Taking a steadying breath, Lucian surveyed the opulent room once more, his battle-honed mind piecing together the impossible facts. The pristine body, the strange servant, the undeniable memory of his own death. There was only one conclusion, no matter how insane. Right now, he had entered the body of a complete stranger. Pushing the thick covers aside, he swung his legs out of bed and walked towards a full-length mirror. His reflection confirmed his hypothesis, but also revealed a surprising detail. The body he now inhabited was not just unfamiliar. It was blessed with striking features and an aristocratic air, a small, but not insignificant, consolation. He leaned closer to the glass, studying the face of this Lucian. The golden hair, the sharp eyes, everything about him radiated nobility. The sheer luxury of the room, with its gilded furniture and rich tapestries, solidified his conclusion. This was the scion of a household that reeked of immense wealth. He knew he needed more information, a baseline to begin navigating this bizarre new reality. Turning to the still sniffling attendant, he cleared his throat. "Hey, Hans," he began, testing the name. "I have a question for you." Ignoring the boy's startled compliance, Lucian asked the most fundamental question he could think of. "What year is it?" The servant, Hans, dismissed the strange question as lingering grogginess from malignant energy, whatever that was. "It is Imperial Year 846, he answered dutifully. The word struck Lucian like a bolt of lightning, freezing him in place. 846, that was 15 years before the day he died. The world seemed to spin around him as the impossible truth settled in. He hadn't just been reincarnated. He had been sent back to the past. Overwhelmed, he clutched his head, but quickly forced himself to regain composure. Panicking now would solve nothing. He had to focus on what needed to be done. His eyes narrowed, his demeanor shifting instantly from confused victim to commanding nobleman. He fixed his gaze on the servant. "Personal servant, Hans," he said, his voice laced with a cold authority he didn't know he possessed. "Do you have a death wish today? How dare a mere servant touch his master's body without permission?" Lucian stepped forward, his presence suddenly immense and intimidating, causing the young servant to shrink back in terror. The air grew heavy with unspoken threat as Lucian leaned in, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Answer me," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Who am I?" Hans immediately fell to the floor, bowing his head in a desperate plea for forgiveness. Please forgive me, young master," he cried. "Your noble name is Lucian Valdek. You are the third son of the great house Valdek." The name echoed in Lucian's mind, a sudden, jarring note of familiarity. Valdek, the name sparked a vivid memory. The fluttering banner, the grand crest, the sprawling estate. He knew that name. A sudden, cold realization began to dawn on him as he connected the name to a place from his distant, and now not so distant, past. The Valdek family. They were legends, a pillar that had supported the empire for centuries. As the emperor's closest aides, they wielded power so immense it was said to rival that of the imperial family itself. They were a historic and prestigious clan, a great house respected and feared throughout the land. And Lucian knew their circumstances all too well, because 15 years ago, in his past life as Jake, the Valdec estate was where he worked. He had spent years there as a common guard, a nameless face protecting the very gates of this mansion. He stumbled back against the mirror, the cruel absurdity of his situation crashing down on him. To think that after dying, he would awaken not as a guard again, but as the third son of the very family he had served from the lowest rungs. The irony was so profound, so bitter, he could only let out a shaky sigh. Memories of his former life flooded his mind, a life of poverty and scorn, where men of higher status threw coins at him like a dog. He remembered the constant struggle, the blood-soaked battles fought for scraps, ending in a lonely graveyard with no one to mourn him. It was a life defined and constrained by his low birth. A dark fire ignited within him. After all that suffering, fate now handed him this golden opportunity. He couldn't help but wonder, with a surge of bitter resentment, how far he could have risen if he had been given such a chance from the beginning. And now, it seemed, he was expected to prove it. Fine. If this was the wish of whatever cruel god orchestrated this, he would grant it. The fractured reflection in his mind, the weary mercenary and the young noble, merged into one. He would seize this new life, throw open the doors to his gilded cage, and show them all just how high he could climb. Now dressed in the fine clothes of a young noble, Lucian walked the magnificent halls of the Valdec Grand Duchy. In his life as a mercenary, he had seen castles and manors of all kinds, but nothing could compare to this. The splendor was staggering, a testament to the family's immense power and wealth. He knew this was a world he needed to get used to, and quickly, but as he walked, he felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. The servants whispered and stared, their gazes a mixture of shock and something else, something that was not normal. An unsettling, shadowy fear followed him down the corridor. He turned to Hans, questioning the strange atmosphere. The servant explained that it was only natural for the staff to be surprised. After all, young Master Lucian had been in seclusion for a year and 2 months, meeting no one but Hans himself. Lucian scoffed internally. What kind of person would coop himself up for over a year? He found the mindset of nobles hard to grasp, but this seemed extreme. In a place like this, under the watchful eye of the giant who protected the empire, Grand Duke Sigmund, acting on a whim should have been impossible. He quickly analyzed the situation. Either the real Lucian was such a problem child that the family had effectively abandoned him, or there was a very special reason the Grand Duke allowed this behavior. Until he knew more, his best course of action was to avoid meeting the head of the family at all costs. Just as he made his resolution, a deep, calm voice cut through the hall. The report stating you were unharmed was true. An impeccably dressed, silver-haired man approached, a faint smile on his lips. Seeing your face after a whole year, this head butler is incredibly happy, young Master Lucian. Lucian's blood ran cold. He recognized the man from his days as a guard, head butler Edwin. A former hostage from a hostile family, his sheer ability had earned him the trust of the Duke, making him the man who ran the entire household. He was, for all intents and purposes, Grand Duke Sigmund's right arm. This was the absolute worst-case scenario. Edwin was the one person he needed to avoid, a man whose sharp eyes could surely detect the coarse mannerisms of a commoner hiding beneath a noble's skin. His only hope was the single fact he could rely on. The head butler hadn't seen the real Lucian for over a year, either. An idea sparked. He would mimic the most noble-like person he had ever known. He composed his features into a perfect, charming smile, adjusting the brilliant blue jewel at his collar. "Thank you for your concern, head butler Edwin," he said, his voice smooth and gracious. "Thanks to you, I've recovered significantly." Maintaining his confident facade, Lucian explained his outing as a chance to look into family affairs, adding that it was fortunate to meet the head butler so soon. He casually asked if there had been any mishaps, feigning a master's concern. Edwin replied with a warm smile, stating the family was well and that he was relieved to see his young master unchanged. Lucian let out a silent sigh of relief. The act had worked. Edwin didn't seem suspicious. He made his excuses, claiming his long absence had left him tired, and turned to leave with a light heart. But as he took a step, Edwin's voice stopped him cold. "Young master, pardon me, but please delay your return for a moment." Lucian's manufactured smile vanished. The head butler's tone was no longer warm, but formal and unyielding. "Right now," Edwin stated, his expression unreadable, "he wishes to see you." Before Lucian could protest, he was being led into a vast, silent office, where an imposing figure sat behind a massive desk, Grand Duke Sigmund. He stood before the man who was now his father, the air thick with an oppressive tension. Lucian's heart hammered in his chest as the Grand Duke finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that carried immense weight. He didn't ask about his health or his seclusion. Instead, he posed a single, chilling question. "Lucian Valdek, why are you alive?" The Grand Duke's voice, a low rumble of ice, finished its chilling question. His golden eyes, narrowed with suspicion and disdain, bore into the young man standing before him. How are you still alive?" The words echoed in the cavernous office, each one a hammer blow against the fragile silence. Lucian stood small and alone, dwarfed by the immense desk and the even more immense presence of the man who was supposed to be his father. Feigning confusion was his only option. "Pardon," Lucian asked, his voice carefully measured to sound weak and bewildered. "I asked what you mean by that." The Grand Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression unchanging. "I intended to overlook it," he stated coldly. "You using your mother's death as an excuse, forgetting your duty, and acting like a spoiled child." His gloved fist clenched atop the polished desk with a sharp crack of leather. "But you finally crossed the line," the Duke growled, his voice rising with controlled fury. "Not content with staging a protest by locking yourself away for over a year, you chose to treat even your own life lightly and attempt to harm yourself." The accusation struck Lucian like a physical blow. A memory flashed through his mind. The young attendant, Edwin, weeping over his bed. The pieces suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. So that was it. The boy wasn't just crying because he'd woken up. He was crying because he believed his master had tried to take his own life. Panic began to stir in Lucian's gut. "Father, I think there is some misunderstanding, but the Grand Duke cut him off, his voice absolute. "For the last time, spill out the thoughts you've kept hidden. Wasn't this your purpose? Using your weak body in your own two hands to shove sleeping pills into your mouth to cause a commotion. That is the reason I am asking for." The world tilted on its axis. Sleeping pills. A desperate act. The fog in his mind began to clear, not with memories of this life, but of a past one. He finally understood why he had no memory of being Lucian. A forgotten fragment of his old life as Jake surfaced, a memory from 15 years ago when he'd served as a guard in this very mansion. He remembered hearing of the Grand Duke's third son, Lucian Waldeck, but he had no memory of the boy's face, only of a somber day, of hushed whispers and a small, ornate coffin being carried from the grand doors. He remembered Lucian Waldeck because he died. The full context of his strange new reality coalesced from the depths of his past life's knowledge. He recalled the gossip about Grand Duke Sigmund Waldeck and his 4 sons, each from a different mother. As a guard, he'd seen the other young lords and their mothers, but Lucian and his mother were phantoms, reclusive figures he never once met face to face. And then came the tragedies. First, Lucian's mother passed away for reasons unknown. Not long after she was laid to rest, whispers filled the halls once more. The reclusive third son, Lucian, had followed after her, his own small coffin sealing the end of his story. Lucian's mind raced, assembling the heartbreaking truth of his predecessor. Back then, he'd just assumed the mother and son were sickly, but now, seeing it from the inside, he understood. The boy's grief, combined with his unstable position in the family, must have been an unbearable weight for one so young. In a desperate, final attempt to get even a sliver of his father's attention, he had made a choice. He chose sleeping pills, just shy of a lethal dose, a cry for help, not an exit. But he had failed to account for his own frailty. A year of seclusion had weakened his body far more than he knew. Unable to handle the drug's effects, The boy who just wanted his father to look at him had died right then and there. A strange sense of detachment washed over Lucian. This entire situation had become a headache. He could almost pity the Grand Duke, scolding a son he hadn't seen in a year, his insides surely churning with a father's pain. But he couldn't afford sympathy now. He was on the verge of falling off a cliff himself, and his own survival was the only thing that mattered. The Duke's words, for the last time, echoed in his ears, a clear and final warning. Lucian could practically hear the ground cracking beneath his feet, his new, golden future threatening to shatter into dust. This was his one and only chance to turn the tide. His mind reeled with the possible fates that awaited a wrong answer. At best, he'd be stuck as a priest in some remote monastery, his life wasted in prayer and solitude. At worst, he'd be exiled to the frozen northern territories, a lifetime of suffering at the claws of wild beasts. The thought of such a miserable existence was ridiculous, infuriating. He gritted his teeth, a fire igniting in his eyes. This was a new life, a second chance he'd obtained even as a blade sliced his neck in his first. It was a precious, oh so precious future. He would not let some other family's tragic drama ruin it. A wild, determined grin spread across his face. He had a plan. Taking a breath, Lucian shifted his entire demeanor from terrified boy to repentant son. "Since you told me to spill it out, I will speak," he began, his voice clear and steady. "First, for smearing the Waldeck name with my foolishness and causing you, Father, great concern. I offer my sincere apologies." He placed a hand over his heart, a perfect picture of contrition. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "This is my fault, with no room for excuses. I will willingly accept whatever punishment you give." The Grand Duke was unmoved, his expression like stone. "Even saying that now won't change anything," he countered. "Therefore, now, wouldn't it be all right for you to rejoice to your heart's content?" It was the opening he needed. "What's past is past," Lucian declared, taking a confident step forward. "Therefore, instead of tying this life of mine, salvaged from the brink of death, to the past any longer, I intend to live diligently for the future ahead." He looked his father directly in the eye, his voice ringing with conviction. "So, not as the Grand Duke, but as a father, please offer just one word of encouragement. When a child who was in the wrong sincerely repents, and the parents willingly embrace them, isn't that the proper duty between a father and son, bound by the laws of heaven?" Standing by the wall, Edwin the butler could only stare, his mind reeling. Unbelievable. He had felt the young master's atmosphere had changed, but this was a complete transformation. Could this bold, articulate man truly be the same boy who was always cowering in the shadows? Was this really young Master Lucian? The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft tap of the Duke's finger on his desk. His gaze was sharp, analytical. "How dare you?" he finally rumbled, a strange mix of anger and astonishment in his tone. "Raising your voice in front of me and lecturing me on the duties of a parent. I've lived long enough to see everything." Lucian held his breath, a faint smile playing on his lips. He had bet everything on this one audacious move. Internally, he was screaming with relief. He clutched his chest, the gamble having paid off. As he'd suspected, a bold counterattack was the only way to deal with a man like the Grand Duke. He knew this man's character from his past life. Grand Duke Waldeck didn't value a timid rat walking on eggshells. He respected the spirit of a wild dog that knew how to attack. The Duke's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile. "It seems you've learned to be quite brazen after coming back from the dead. Very well. Since you mentioned diligence yourself, I will ask first. Lucian Waldeck, what do you intend to do from now on?" Lucian's answer was ready. "First of all, I will fix this broken body first." Images of his former life flooded his senses. The feel of a perfectly balanced sword, the thrill of battle, the power that once coursed through his veins. With that strength as his goal, he made his declaration. "I intend to learn the sword properly." "The sword? You?" the Grand Duke questioned, an eyebrow raised in skepticism. Lucian gave a self-deprecating smile. "Yes, though I need to resolve this paper doll-like body first. But if I eat and sleep diligently, won't it work out somehow?" After a long, assessing silence, the Duke chuckled softly. You have a way with words. Whether it's just bluffing or not, I will know by watching, the Grand Duke decided, leaning back in his chair. He turned to his butler. Edwin, give him that again. Rather than a few words that don't resonate, that will be more useful. Edwin bowed deeply. Understood, master. I will process it so it is available immediately. Lucian could only watch, a question mark hanging over his head. Later, outside the Grand Manor, his question was answered. Servants hauled heavy wooden chests onto a carriage, and as one lid was lifted, it revealed a breathtaking sight. A treasure trove of gold coins, jewels, and priceless artifacts shimmering in the sunlight. Edwin stood beside him, his mouth agape in shock. Lucian himself was dumbfounded. This is ridiculous, he breathed, staring at the fortune before him. So this was the power of a high noble. He finally understood. That was a tremendously huge allowance. He ran his hands through a cascade of gold coins, a smile of pure, unadulterated ambition spreading across his face. And this was just for 1 month. With this amount, it was worth a shot. A plan, more daring than any he had conceived before, took shape in his mind. He could completely overhaul this weak body. He could make that legendary elixir. In a magnificent glass conservatory flooded with ethereal sunlight, Grand Duke Sigmund Waldeck walked with a heavy, measured gait. His imposing figure, draped in a formal cape, cast a long shadow over the vibrant flowers. Beside him, the head butler, Edwin, followed with silent deference, their footsteps the only sound in the hallowed silence of the greenhouse. Edwin glanced at the Duke's stern profile, his own expression a mixture of reverence and concern. This is the place the late Grand Duchess cherished especially during her life, he remarked softly. He knew the Grand Duke hadn't set foot in this sanctuary for a long time. His return now could only be spurred by one thing: the startling transformation of his youngest son, Lucian. Edwin's mind drifted back, recalling the deep bond between mother and son. Even though Lucian had fallen from his father's grace, he was still the child of the woman the Grand Duke had loved so dearly. That connection was a powerful one, not something the master would sever lightly, no matter how disappointed he was. Yet, Edwin couldn't help but remember the boy Lucian used to be. A truly pathetic child, he thought with a grimace. He was a boy defined by fear, his eyes always darting about nervously, ready to whine like a stray dog at the slightest reprimand. The Grand Duke's voice, a low rumble, broke the silence. His attitude was so different from hers, he mused, his gaze distant. For years, Sigmund had resigned himself to the belief that Lucian's only resemblance to his mother was his physical appearance. But for the first time today, a seed of doubt had been planted. A flicker of something, perhaps intrigue or a long-dormant hope, crossed the Grand Duke's face. He turned to his butler. You must have seen it too, Edwin. That child looking straight into my eyes and stating his opinion. Edwin bowed his head in affirmation. Yes, master. There was not a single waver. It was a truly resolute and confident appearance. Edwin attempted to soften the Grand Duke's assessment, attributing the change to Lucian's supposed tender heart. After all, he added gently, the young master has inherited your blood, master. But Sigmund was not so easily swayed, a wry smile touching his lips as he replied, that remains to be seen. The Grand Duke continued, his tone hardening with purpose. The tasks placed before that child from now on are things that can never be solved with just a few words. As he spoke, Edwin's face grew troubled. Master, he interrupted, a bead of sweat on his brow. However, there is one problem. Edwin explained the delicate situation. Although the Grand Duke had resumed Lucian's considerable allowance, an investigation had confirmed that a portion of the funds had been leaked. His report was grim. Upon investigation, it appears the second young master, Geordie Waldeck, is involved. The details of the plot were laid bare. Geordie hadn't just siphoned funds. He had strategically dismissed the head maid loyal to Lucian and installed his own associate in her place. It was a blatant power move, designed to isolate and control his younger brother. The Grand Duke let out a quiet sound of disapproval. He is a capable child, but his vessel is narrow, he said, his voice laced with disappointment. He understood Geordie's deep-seated resentment, but this persistence was petty. When Edwin asked if he should intervene, the Grand Duke's command was absolute. "No, Butler, do not intervene in this matter." Edwin voiced his concern, questioning if this wasn't too harsh a test for someone just finding their feet. But the Grand Duke was resolute. He saw Geordie's scheme as a consequence of Lucian's own past weakness, a price to be paid. A calculating look entered his eyes. "It actually works out well. Let's watch how that child handles it this time. If he can't even handle that, there would be no reason to have expectations." For the Grand Duke, this was the ultimate trial. The blood of the Waldeck family, mighty as the lion of their crest, was merely a key. True strength came from the will to turn that key and open the door to one's own destiny. Lucian would now have to prove he possessed that will. A few days later, whispers filled the halls of the Waldeck estate. Two maids gossiped worriedly about the young master, who had once again locked himself away. Outside his chambers, his personal attendant, Hans, stood guard, a storm of anxiety brewing on his face. Hans's mind reeled with panic. It had been 3 days since the support funds arrived. He remembered the day vividly. Lucian had returned from his meeting with the Duke, and soon after, servants began hauling massive chests into the courtyard, a veritable dragon's hoard of gold and jewels. Hans had been overwhelmed with emotion. Considering the ice-cold relationship between father and son, he knew his master must have summoned tremendous courage to face him. He believed Lucian was finally ready to move forward, to leave the past behind. He had wiped away tears of pride, his heart swelling for his master's new beginning. But his touching moment was shattered by the sight of Lucian, not grieving or contemplating, but cackling with unrestrained glee as he plunged his hands into the mountains of gold coins. A manic light had burned in Lucian's eyes. "With this amount, it's worth a shot," he declared, his voice filled with an ambition Hans had never heard before. "To completely overhaul this weak body. I can make that elixir." The words had been a shocking premonition of the strange events to come. Back in the present, inside the sealed room, Lucian worked tirelessly amidst bubbling concoctions and rising steam. He wiped sweat from his brow, his thoughts briefly turning to the loyal boy outside. Hans was no doubt bursting with curiosity, but the fact he stood guard so diligently proved his unwavering loyalty. Lucian surveyed his collection of rare materials, alchemical tools a high noble would never deign to touch, and the primary ingredient, the moonlight herb. It was an obscenely expensive plant that grew only in moonlight, its practical application still a mystery to the world. He had spent his entire fortune acquiring it, a reckless gamble by any standard. A plan began to form, not just for his own body, but for his future wealth. He made a mental note to instruct Hans. "Buy up the moonlight herb," he thought, a knowing glint in his eye. "I might look crazy now, but in just 1 year." A predatory grin spread across his face as the memory from his past life surfaced with perfect clarity. The price of the moonlight herb was about to explode. No, over 20 times. It will skyrocket mindlessly. This knowledge, this foresight, was his greatest weapon. He paused, allowing himself a moment of reflection. The Alchemist Guild of his previous world had been truly audacious. They had risked everything, scraping together every last moonlight herb in the Empire for a project with an uncertain outcome, a gamble of a lifetime on their guild's fate. And their incredible risk had paid off. From that gamble, they created an unprecedented elixir that sent shockwaves through the Empire. They succeeded in developing the drink of the gods, nectar. Their hubris in naming a mere drug after divinity nearly got them charged with blasphemy. But the moment nectar's miraculous effects were revealed, all criticism vanished. The world, once ready to condemn them, was suddenly busy singing their praises. Lucian knew its true value better than anyone. In his former life, it was an undeniable truth that a martial artist's limits were set at birth. This belief was an absolute law, an unbreakable chain of destiny that dictated one's entire life. That millennium-old common sense, that absolute law of innate limitation, was shattered into pieces by a single, miraculous creation. The thing that broke the chains of destiny was nectar. Just by drinking nectar, even the most talentless individuals could be reborn as competent swordsmen. Lucian examined the vial in his hand. It was a crude, mass-produced imitation, its efficacy a pale shadow of the original. But to mend a body as broken and frail as Lucian's, it was the perfect and only solution. With a determined gaze, he rolled up his sleeve, addressing the vessel he now inhabited. "Count yourself lucky, noble young master," he whispered, a promise of transformation in his voice. This frail body was about to receive a gift beyond its wildest imagination. He remembered the tragic end of the Alchemist's Guild. When war and chaos consumed the empire, their knowledge was deemed too dangerous. The nectar recipe, a secret that could upend the world's balance of power, was purposefully destroyed, its creators burned, and the formula vanished from the world. However, his unique circumstances had given him an advantage. "I managed to gather clues and make something similar somehow," he mused, knowing full well the danger. Most who had tried this path in his past life had perished from horrific side effects. But with his goal in sight, there was no room for hesitation. Without another thought, Lucian brought the vial to his lips and downed the crimson liquid in a single gulp. A potent energy immediately surged through him, an explosive catalyst for the rebirth to come. From this moment on, everything would change. The fundamental process began, the transformation of nature's power into his own. This was the birth of mana. The success of this endeavor depended entirely on the process of circulation, how well this newfound energy could be spread and retrieved throughout the body. The quality and performance of a warrior's power differed starkly based on this circulation. Lucian used the overwhelming force of the nectar to blast open the blocked and withered energy pathways inside his new, fragile body. He braced himself for the excruciating pain that should accompany such a violent internal restructuring. But to his profound shock, there was no resistance, no agony at all. The mana flowed through him as if through an open river, spreading unhindered, settling into place as if it had always belonged there. His eyes widened in disbelief. This was impossible. Even the body of a newborn baby contained impurities that blocked the flow of mana. An electrifying thought struck him, so unbelievable he barely dared to consider it. Don't tell me this guy, this weak, pathetic boy, is the type called a genius? Immersed in the pure, flowing river of mana within him, Lucian finally understood. He hadn't just been given a new life and a vast fortune. He had inherited a vessel of unimaginable, God-given talent, a potential that had been lying dormant, just waiting to be awakened. The sun cast long shadows over the Grand Valdec estate. Inside, a young attendant named Hans paced nervously outside a set of ornate double doors, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. He had been waiting for what felt like an eternity. Finally, with a soft click, the door swung open, and Hans's anxious gaze met the person within. Lucian stood silhouetted against the bright light from his room, a calm, almost detached expression on his face. "Nothing happened while you were waiting, right, Hans?" he asked, his voice even. The question broke the dam of the attendant's worry, and Hans rushed forward, tears streaming down his face as he cried out, "Young master, do you have any idea how long you've been in there?" The young servant wiped at his eyes, his voice choked with emotion. He explained how he had called out repeatedly with no answer, and how Lucian's strict orders not to enter had left him terrified that something terrible had happened. Lucian, seeing the genuine panic in the boy's eyes, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. A faint, knowing smile touched Lucian's lips, his golden eyes shimmering with a light Hans had never seen before. The attendant, taken aback by this sudden change, could only stare. The fear and insecurity that usually clung to his master were gone, replaced by an unnerving confidence. "Young master," Lucian, Hans stammered, his mind racing to comprehend the transformation. Hans leaned closer, his brow furrowed in confusion as he examined Lucian's face. It was undeniably the young master, yet something was profoundly different. An unsettling feeling crept into his heart, a nagging suspicion that the person standing before him was not the same one who had entered that room. Lucian watched the attendant's suspicious scrutiny with amusement. He thought, because the boy had watched over the original Lucian more closely than anyone, he was the first to sense that something fundamental had changed. It was a complication, but a minor one in the grand scheme of things. While the physical body needed time and nutrition to strengthen, the real transformation was internal. The mana he had cultivated, the very essence of his power as Jake, was now flowing freely through Lucian's vessel. It surged through his meridians and settled into his core, changing his very being at an unbelievable speed. A confident smirk spread across his face. This incredible harmony with mana, this effortless control, was all thanks to the original Lucian's innate constitution. He lowered his head, a quiet certainty solidifying in his mind. I'm certain of it. This body, this second chance, was far more than he could have ever hoped for. He stood as if on a grand chessboard, a giant king piece looming before him. This boy's potential was not merely good. It was in the same league as the legendary figures who had shaped the very course of history. A satisfied grin crossed his face as the possibilities unfolded in his mind. Lucian turned his attention back to the still confused Hans. Hans, he began, his tone now sharp and serious. Now that I think about it, I owe this opportunity to you. He grabbed the boy by the shoulders, his gaze intense. Rewards and punishments must always be clear, after all. Listen well, I'm only going to say this once. A wide, almost predatory grin stretched across Lucian's face, his eyes gleaming with ambition. Scrape together everything you have. Sell your underwear if you have to, and go all in, he commanded, his voice filled with a fanatical energy. He struck a dramatic pose, laughing with unbridled excitement. I guarantee you a smooth ride to the top. Let's go together. To the skies. Lucian mused silently, a playful glint in his eye. To be on the receiving end of such a golden opportunity. In his old life, the nobles he knew were never so generous. He was enjoying this new role immensely, leaving his poor attendant staring blankly, a whirlwind of question marks spinning around his head. A week passed. In a peaceful forest bathed in the warm light of the sun, Lucian strolled leisurely with his hands behind his head, Hans trailing faithfully beside him. The serene atmosphere was a stark contrast to the rigid formality of the ducal estate. Lucian took a deep, refreshing breath, a wide grin of contentment on his face. He wondered, feasts served like clockwork, rooms cleaned without him lifting a finger, even his bedding prepared for him. It was a world away from his past life, where starvation had been a constant companion. He chuckled at the sheer absurdity of his good fortune. Thanks to this life of leisure, he had been able to focus fully on his recovery and acclimating to his new body. Now, he could finally address the one thing that had been weighing on his mind since he first arrived. He pulled a crudely drawn picture from his jacket, a memento of a life that no longer existed. In this world, at this point in time, the man known as Jake, who had once served as a guard for the Valdek family, had never existed at all. His investigation had been thorough. He had confirmed with the captain of the guards that no one fitting Jake's description had ever been employed there. When he visited his old post, he found the shift he used to work was occupied by a complete stranger. He folded the worn paper, his expression grim. This was for the best. There was no benefit in trying to find his past self. It would only be a distraction. In truth, he lacked the confidence to face the man he used to be. The thought alone was enough to make him shudder with embarrassment. As Lucian trembled with the thought of his past, Hans watched him with growing anxiety. "Why, young Master Lucian?" he called out, his voice shaking. "Are you really thinking of going in there?" Hans's voice was filled with disbelief as he pointed towards the imposing structure ahead of them. "You said you wouldn't even set foot near the training grounds because you hated them so much," he exclaimed. Lucian feigned ignorance, tilting his head. "I did," he asked, prompting an even more frantic response from his attendant. "Yes," Hans insisted, recalling the incident with the second young master, Geordie. Lucian listened, the pieces falling into place. As swordsmanship was a required skill for the children of a Grand Duke, It provided the perfect pretext for his cruel older brother to torment him. The memory, though not his own, was vivid. Under the guise of swordsmanship training, Geordie had brutally beaten the young Lucian, instilling a deep-seated fear of violence in the training hall itself. It was a cruel and effective method to ensure the weak third son would never challenge him. Lucian's expression softened as he looked at the worried boy. "I have a rough idea why you're acting like this, but there's no need to worry," he said calmly. "That is all in the past." Hans could only look on, utterly baffled by his master's newfound resolve. With a firm step, Lucian moved past his servant, a determined glint in his eyes. "You just need to trust me and follow my lead," he stated, leaving no room for argument. He walked with a purpose Hans had never witnessed, his back straight and his stride unwavering. Inside the vast, stone training hall, two guards conversed in hushed tones. "What? Is that true?" one asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "That the third young master came here on his own 2 feet? The very idea seemed preposterous." "Yes, I'm certain," the guard confirmed. "He's currently looking around with his personal servant." Nearby, their captain, a man with a prominent mustache named Hendrik, stroked his chin in thought. He mused. A cruel smile slowly spread across Hendrik's face. He gestured to the guard. "You, go report this to him right now," he ordered, his green eyes glinting with malice. "I'll make sure to have him cooked up nicely by the time he arrives." Lucian surveyed the grand hall, his initial apprehension replaced by awe. I had high hopes, but this blows them out of the water," he murmured. There was an ample supply of weapons and a massive, open space that could accommodate even the most intense training. The sheer scale of it was staggering. A shadow of his past crossed his features as he thought of his old comrades. If they had trained in a place like this, he mused grimly, perhaps more of them would have survived. A voice boomed from across the hall. My eye wasn't seeing things after all. To think it's really the third young master." Hendrik strode towards them, a wide, insincere smile plastered on his face. "It's such a surprise, I honestly couldn't believe my eyes." Hendrik's tone dripped with condescension as he continued. "I still vividly remember how you turned tail and ran without looking back after your lesson with Lord Geordie a year ago." He leaned in, his expression turning sinister, just like a little lamb being chased by a wolf. Hendrik's gaze shifted to the trembling servant. "Is that why? You still seem terrified of this place," he sneered, noticing how Hans clutched his own shirt in fear. "Seeing as you've even dragged a servant into this sacred hall of warriors." Stepping closer, Hendrik's voice dropped to a low, menacing tone. "It's been a long time. I, Hendrik, offer my humble greetings," he said, the words a hollow formality. "A year ago, I personally instructed you on your stance alongside the second young master. Do you recall? The memory was enough to make the original Lucian's phantom fear surface, a cold dread seizing the body." Hendrik licked his lips, savoring the memory of the boy's terror. "It was truly an enjoyable time," he whispered with sadistic glee. But instead of the cowering he expected, a low chuckle escaped Lucian's lips, a shadow falling across his face. Lucian thought, the last vestiges of the original's fear melting away. A sharp, predatory grin replaced his faint smile, his golden eyes burning with an entirely new kind of fire. This wasn't the lamb Hendrik remembered. This was something else entirely. "This is gonna be fun." A knight. The very word was an incantation, conjuring images of honor and loyalty. They were warriors born of noble blood, their lives dedicated to the mastery of martial arts and etiquette from a tender age. Their worth was not inherited, but forged in the crucible of battle, their merit established through missions and achievements that echoed through the halls of history. Only after spilling blood and sweat upon the battlefield, only after their deeds were recognized by their sovereign, would they finally kneel. In that solemn moment, they received the title of knight from their liege, a culmination of a lifetime of struggle. It was in that act of fealty that they believed they found the true purpose of their existence. Lucian watched Hendrik, the knight instructor, with a cool, appraising gaze. All that talk of honor and loyalty was just window dressing. Lucian thought with cold cynicism, They were tools, bound by duty and coined to a master. That was their lot in life, to show courtesy and loyalty not only to the liege who provided their wealth and honor, but to his entire bloodline. And that's precisely why Hendrik's smug, arrogant attitude grated on him so fiercely. For a hunting dog to look down on his master's son, it was a breach of the natural order. Lucian's mind worked quickly, analyzing the man's audacity. Part of it, he concluded, was undoubtedly due to the original Lucian's pathetic reputation. The boy had been a non-entity within the family, a target ripe for disrespect from those seeking to curry favor with his more powerful siblings. But the larger factor was confidence born from borrowed power. Hendrik wasn't acting alone. He was leashed to a more influential master. He was merely the attack dog for Lucian's ambitious and cruel older brother, Jordi, the second young master. Lucian mused, the old, ruthless instincts of his past life bubbling to the surface. He imagined grabbing the arrogant knight and subjecting him to the kind of intense, mind-breaking training that would reforge his very soul. He would beat the insolence out of him until nothing but absolute obedience remained. But he immediately dismissed the violent fantasy. The Grand Duke, his new father, was an imposing and calculating man. He would never permit one of his sons to so flagrantly discipline a knight sworn to the family, no matter the provocation. For now, subtlety was required. Regardless of his personal feelings, a knight was a core military asset. Causing a scene and punishing Hendrik without due process would only create unnecessary friction within the family's power structure. He clenched his fist, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. It was not the time just yet. Putting on an air of detached nonchalance, Lucian addressed the knight. It seems foolish to avoid the training hall simply because of what happened in the past. I intend to stop by often from now on, if only to learn the sword forms. As you said, sir, a year has passed. Shouldn't I be moving busily to catch up? Hendrik's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly melted into a hearty, condescending laugh. Sword forms, you say, third young master? You are quite skilled at joking. It is already far too late for you to learn them now. You seem unaware, so allow me to inform you. If you are past the age of 15, you can consider it over. The instructor launched into a patronizing lecture, his voice filled with false reverence. Sword forms are the secret techniques and legacy created by our ancestors. Simply mimicking the movements grants enlightenment and evolves the physical body. They are the essence of ancient wisdom. He paused for dramatic effect before delivering the final, crushing blow to Lucian's supposed ambition. However, that is only meaningful on the premise that the path of mana is open. Since that path closes starting at 16, it would be nothing more than physical exertion for you. Sword forms without enlightenment are just a hollow shell, nothing more than a dance. Leaning in close, a sadistic sneer spread across Hendrik's face. Come to think of it, perhaps that would suit you, young master. Why not take this opportunity to become the Empire's #1 dancer? Or, if not that, you could just spend your time gardening. The other knights in the courtyard chuckled along, enjoying their master's humiliation. Hendrik stood back, crossing his arms with an air of absolute triumph. Everyone has a role that suits them best, after all, he concluded, looking at the boy he assumed he'd crushed. Bah, look at him, speechless and unable to say a word. He had won. Internally, Hendrik gloated. Of course, the notion of the mana path closing at 16 was a complete and utter lie, nonsense that would be exposed with the slightest research. But it didn't matter. He could just feign ignorance later. The objective, publicly shaming the worthless third son, had already been achieved. This was the moment he had been waiting for, to see that fool crushed by his own ignorance, unable to utter a single rebuttal, to see that pathetic worm, mocked by a mere retainer, too terrified to even move. He wanted to see him revert to the trembling coward he was a year ago. But the cowering never came. Lucian's hand twitched slightly, the only sign of his inner thoughts. Then, he spoke, his voice dangerously calm. Sir Hendrik, for some reason, it seems a little different from what I know. The path of mana closes around the age of 25, not 16, so I understand there is no issue with learning even now. Hendrik froze. Lucian pressed forward, his face obscured by shadow, his tone sharp. Huh, are you sure about those words right now? It seems you are mistaken, sir. Does Brother Geordie share this view as well? Of course he doesn't. It is such obvious common sense. The knight's smug expression evaporated, replaced by cold sweat. The mention of Geordie's name was a masterstroke. He couldn't possibly refute the claim now, without making his powerful backer look like a fool. The trap was sprung. Stuttering, he could only agree. Why yes, that's how it is. Even brother said that. In a flash, Lucian's demeanor changed completely. He spun around and roughly grabbed a young squire named Hans by the hair. Hans, it seems the Waldeck family is doomed, he cried out dramatically. The squire trembled in terror, utterly confused. Why, young master? Why am I being dragged into this? Lucian clutched his head as if in agony, his voice ringing across the training grounds. To think he is confused about common sense that even a street mutt knows. At his age, does that make any sense? Just how many talents have been deprived of opportunities because of that incorrect knowledge? Tears are clouding my vision. He staggered back, a picture of noble despair. To think my brother was the owner of such a hollow skull. Hendrik could only stare, dumbfounded. What on earth are you saying right now? Lucian shoved his hand away. Do not stop me. If what the knight says is true, this is a shame to the family and a clear crisis, is it not? The act fell away, replaced by a sharp, predatory smile. Lucian's golden eyes bored into Hendrik's, his voice a low, threatening whisper. Surely, you aren't trying to deceive me, the son of your liege, are you? Hendrik was completely flustered, stumbling over his words. The situation had spiraled entirely out of his control, twisted by the very boy he had sought to humiliate. What do you mean by that? He stammered, sweat pouring down his face. Lucian feigned a sigh, his expression softening into one of magnanimous understanding. Please forget what I just said. I simply misspoke because I could not believe this situation. Then, a wicked grin spread across his face as he laid the final part of his trap. There is no way a knight of the Waldeck family would do something so petty, is there? Desperate for an out, Hendrik quickly agreed. That is a matter of course. Lucian's smile widened. Right, I knew it. The mood shifted instantly. Lucian's expression became stone cold. In that case, this is a matter we absolutely cannot overlook lightly. His eyes glinted with malice. It was time to teach this man what happens when you wag your tongue the wrong way. Sir Hendrik, Lucian began, his voice now booming with righteous indignation. You do not seem to realize how serious this matter is at all. If you simply intended to humiliate me, I was planning to just let it pass. The fact that you and everyone else do not look kindly upon me is due to my own faults for forgetting my duty. How could I rebuke you for that? His tone hardened, his words echoing with newfound authority. However, apart from that, if you, a knight, and my brother, the pillar of the Grand Duchy, are hindering the recruitment of talent with incorrect knowledge, that is something I absolutely cannot turn a blind eye to. It could become a grave danger to the safety of our territory's people. The young squire Hans looked on, his cheeks flushed with awe at the young master's noble speech. Lucian struck a dramatic pose, clutching his chest. As one who carries the Waldeck name, it is only right that I be outraged. He thought to himself with immense satisfaction. Lucian advanced on the pale, trembling knight. Sir Hendrik, now do you clearly understand the gravity of this issue? He poked the man's chest for emphasis. You had best prepare yourself. I intend to report this to father and request an internal crackdown. Hendrik's mind short-circuited. He scrambled for an explanation, for any sense in the situation. The image of the weak, cowering boy shattered in his mind. In his place, Hendrik now saw a terrifying predator lurking in the shadows of a blood-red forest. He was not facing a lamb. He was facing a hungry wolf, and he had just willingly stepped into its den. The steady, confident sound of footsteps cut through the tense atmosphere. A figure emerged from the manor, his presence commanding immediate attention. Hendrik's eyes widened in a fresh wave of terror as he recognized the newcomer. "Oh, Lord Geordie," he cried out. Lucian turned, his lips curling into a knowing, predatory smile. He hadn't planned for this, but it was a welcome development. The main player had just walked onto the stage. He mused. The man who approached was impeccably dressed, a large, ornate brooch pinned to his cravat. His sharp eyes, the same gold as Lucian's, held nothing but cold contempt as they settled on his younger brother. "It's you again, Lucian Valdec," Geordie Valdec, the second son, said, his voice dripping with disdain. As Geordie Valdec appeared, a wave of palpable terror washed over Hendrik. The knight's bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold sweat and trembling limbs. He scrambled toward the second young master, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to explain the situation, stammering and tripping over his own words. Geordie raised a single, dismissive hand, silencing the panicked knight with a simple command: "Stop." His voice was devoid of emotion, but his golden eyes were glacial. "You don't need to explain," Geordie stated, his gaze boring into Hendrik's soul, "because I saw your disgraceful behavior with my own eyes." Leaning in, Geordie's voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper. "To be swayed by a young child who has lived barely half your age, it is utterly disappointing." He placed a hand on Hendrik's shoulder, a gesture that was more of a threat than a comfort. "Control your expression," he warned, "unless you intend to put me in a more difficult spot." Geordie then turned his frigid attention towards Lucian and his trembling servant. The young attendant, Hans, flinched as if struck, cowering behind his master. Lucian, however, simply watched his older brother's performance, a flicker of amusement in his eyes as he observed the thinly veiled rage. Indeed, Lucian mused to himself, his expression is quite a sight. Geordie Valdec, the second son, carried himself as the very model of a traditional noble. He was seen as a true successor, but this was a carefully crafted facade. In reality, his influence was being eroded by the first son, forcing him to recruit outsiders to build his own power base. He needed to maintain an image of absolute authority, and this public squabble was a direct threat to that. Lucian offered a placid, almost sweet smile. "I greet you, older brother Geordie," he said, his tone perfectly respectful. Geordie's lips curled slightly, his expression unreadable. "It's been a long time, second young master," he replied, the formal title a deliberate jab. "Have you been well all this time?" Without warning, Geordie's demeanor shifted, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "You foolish fellow." Lucian, playing the part of the confused younger brother, widened his eyes. "Pardon?" he asked, his voice laced with feigned innocence. "What do you mean by that all of a sudden?" Geordie's gaze was sharp and accusatory. "As for what words were exchanged between you and Sir Hendrik, I was watching everything," he declared. A cruel smirk touched his lips. "You dare to do something that damages the dignity of the Valdec family." Lucian gasped, recoiling as if mortally wounded. "Damage the dignity? Could you explain so I can understand better?" Geordie began his lecture, ostensibly rebuking his subordinate. "It seems there was a mistake. Putting my name forward was a clear error, and he cannot be free from that responsibility." He then shifted his tone, adopting a magnanimous air. "However, I have no intention of rebuking him, because I know well the weight of his loyalty and how much blood he has shed for this family." His eyes narrowed, and he delivered the intended final blow, his voice dripping with contempt. "Unlike you." He took a step closer to Lucian, his presence overwhelming. "For someone who couldn't even endure swordsmanship training and ran away, do you think you have the right to blame him?" Geordie's tone was that of a stern teacher scolding a witless student. "Lucian Valdec, you must first learn respect for the knights." He gestured broadly to the men standing behind him, his voice rising with theatrical gravitas. "Because they exist, Valdec can exist." Turning to the assembled crowd, Geordie performed for his audience. "Everyone, I will apologize on his behalf for today's commotion. It is the mistake of an immature child, so please show generosity." He looked back at Lucian, his face twisting into a grotesque, toothy grin. "I will take special care of my foolish younger brother." Lucian saw the pathetic play for what it was. He thought, a cunning smile spreading across his face. Geordie had twisted the narrative, attempting to save face, while simultaneously shaming Lucian and subtly insulting the knights. Lucian conceded silently. With a sudden, dramatic shift, Lucian's expression morphed into one of profound admiration. As expected of older brother, Geordie paused, taken aback. Although there was a misunderstanding, Lucian continued, clutching his chest as if overwhelmed with emotion. Instead of scolding me for insulting you, to think you would bestow such valuable teachings. Lucian's voice boomed across the training grounds, listing fabricated insults. Calling older brothers had a helmet rack or an empty head. I am ashamed of myself. Hans frantically tried to shush him, his face a mask of pure panic. Geordie's confident smirk finally cracked, a flicker of outrage appearing in his eyes. While his outward performance was one of zealous gratitude, Lucian's inner thoughts were cold and calculated. He would use Geordie's own stage to announce his rebirth to the world. Lucian's face contorted in a wild, manic grin as he raised a fist in the air. This was his declaration of war against the past, a public proclamation for all to hear. The timid, pathetic third young master of the past no longer exists. Having completely seized control of the situation, Lucian's demeanor snapped back to a calm, detached politeness. Therefore, I intend to leave now. Will you permit it? He asked, already turning to walk away. Geordie, left speechless and fuming, finally found his voice. You scoundrel, he snarled. Do you think you can just leave like this? Lucian paused, looking over his shoulder with eyes that were suddenly devoid of all warmth. Have you forgotten? Father is currently watching me closely. His voice was a low, chilling whisper. As for me, well, I have nothing to lose. But older brother, the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Geordie was frozen in place, rendered powerless by the mention of the Grand Duke. Then, I'll take that as your agreement, Lucian said cheerfully, grabbing the still petrified Hans. I will take my leave now, older brother Geordie. With a theatrical wave, he dragged his servant away, whispering under his breath, Hey, let's bolt quickly. Hendrik watched them go, utterly bewildered, before turning to the silent figure of his master. Lord Geordie, is it okay to just let him go back like this? In response, a terrifying, murderous aura erupted from Geordie, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He said nothing, but the silent promise of retribution was absolute. Once they were safely away from the main estate, Hans finally dared to speak, his voice trembling. Young master, will it really be okay? He looked back towards the manor, the fear of what they had done settling deep in his bones. You know Lord Geordie's personality better than anyone, young master. Hans's voice trailed off before he burst into tears. He absolutely won't just let this matter slide. I'll be taken by that scary mustache knight. Lucian sighed, his expression unreadable. I get it, so calm down, Hans. Lucian knew Hans's fear was justified. He, too, had memories from another life. Memories of suffering under the thumb of an incompetent superior who only made things worse. But this life would be different. That won't happen, he said, his voice firm. So get up quickly. Hans looked up, tears still streaming down his face. A mere knight wouldn't dare commit such an act, Lucian assured him, and I won't let that happen either. He looked down at his loyal servant, a flicker of genuine empathy in his eyes. You suffered a lot because of me all this time, Hans. He extended a hand to help him up. Lucian's expression softened as he gently wiped a tear from Hans's cheek. If the master acts like a fool, it's the subordinates who suffer the most, he said quietly. Especially since you are my personal servant, it must have been even worse for you. His eyes hardened with resolve. I will promise you this one thing. Looking his loyal servant directly in the eye, Lucian made a solemn vow, one that would define his new path. From now on, I will never let my foolish actions cause my people to be looked down upon or tremble in fear. He took Hans's hand, his grip firm and unwavering, sealing the promise between master and servant. Inside the opulent Waldeck manor, Lucian and his servant Hans hurried down a grand hallway. A heavy silence had fallen over the estate since the confrontation with Geordie and his knight. Lucian's mind raced, a storm of calculations and predictions swirling behind his calm facade. Lucian mused, his steps never faltering. He knew his brother's temperament all too well. Lucian's hand tightened, crumpling a document he held. A grimace of pure rage twisted his features, his golden eyes burning with fury. He had waited for this day, for the resources to finally begin his grand plan, and his brother had dared to interfere. "You're right, young master," Hans declared, his own face a mask of indignation. He grabbed his master's sleeve, shaking with anger. "We absolutely cannot let this slide." Lucian, fueled by his servant's loyalty, squared his shoulders. "Are you ready, Hans?" he asked, a fire igniting in his voice. "I'm ready, young master." The shared fury exploded. How dare he? Lucian seethed, his voice trembling with rage. How dare he touch my allowance? At the same time, Hans's own grievance burst forth, his face contorted in disbelief and anger. "And my salary too." It had all started with the budget plan he received that very day. It was the day his account was to be replenished, the day he was supposed to buy the precious moonlight grass and other supplies for the elixir. He had been practically vibrating with joyful anticipation, ready to finally put his plans into motion. He remembered holding the letter, a giddy, triumphant smile on his face. Everything was falling into place. But as he'd opened the envelope and read the contents, his smile had frozen, then vanished completely. A wave of cold shock washed over him as the document slipped from his numb fingers. The document, stamped with the family crest, contained a horrifying summary. Lucian Baldek's allowance, minus 75%. Hans's salary, minus 30%. The truth struck him like a physical blow. The second young master, that contemptible snake Geordie, had put his hands on his money. And he'd done it through the head made he had planted in Lucian's own annex. This wasn't just a petty squabble, it was embezzlement, a felony punishable by severe execution, even in the cutthroat world of noble society. Lucian marched toward the main hall, his purpose clear. Geordie could only pull off such an absurd stunt because there was a gap in Lucian's defenses. After the passing of his mother, the original Lucian had, in his grief and apathy, entrusted all budget management to the former head maid, Dana, a woman who had been by his side for a long time. But Dana was no longer in charge. The power now rested with a new face, a red-haired maid whose loyalty was not to him. She was the weapon Geordie had chosen to wound him. As Lucian and Hans entered the hall, they were met by the very same maid. She offered a prim curtsy. "Oh my, this is my first time greeting you face to face. It is a pleasure to meet you, young Master Lucian. I am Jenny, the new head maid appointed to replace Ms. Dana." Her smile was wide, but it never reached her eyes. "I wanted to greet you when I was first appointed, but back then, you didn't seem to have any intention of coming out of your room," she said, her tone laced with false sympathy and mockery. She looked him up and down with a condescending smirk. "I assume that long period of wandering is finally over." Hans bristled instantly, stepping forward to defend his master's honor. "What kind of tone is that to the young master?" he shouted. Lucian calmly raised a hand, stopping him. "Calm down, Hans. She's not wrong," he said, his voice dangerously even. Hans looked at him, stunned into silence. Lucian turned back to Jenny, a disarming smile on his face as he twirled the offending document in his hand. "Let's skip the small talk for today. We have more important matters to discuss." His smile vanished as he held out the papers, his hand clenching the parchment. "I'll ask you directly. Did you draft this budget plan?" Jenny feigned a giggle, covering her mouth with her hand. "I wondered why you called for me. Was it because of the budget?" "Yes, I wrote it." She straightened up, her expression turning smug and self-righteous. "Since the young master gave full authority to the former head maid, I simply carried out my duties as they were handed down to me." A dark, malicious aura seemed to radiate from her as she continued her performance. "But I must say, I'm a bit perplexed to be interrogated like this when I've worked so diligently." She held the document out to him as if it were a trophy. "This was originally work you should have been doing yourself, young master." Lucian thought, his eyes narrowing. She was leveraging the original Lucian's negligence, and she wasn't wrong. "Fine," he conceded, turning his gaze towards the sunlit window. "I understand that point. It couldn't be helped." However, putting that aside, there is something that doesn't add up. He addressed the room, his voice carrying over the silent staff. I confirmed that the majority of the funds father reissued were allocated to raising the servants' salaries. Since you all suffered due to my negligence, one could consider it compensation. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before turning his piercing gaze back to Jenny. However, why was Hans's salary cut instead of raised? He presented the document again, now an instrument of accusation. Don't you think this is too blatant? A flicker of panic crossed Jenny's face before she masked it with a breezy laugh. Oh my, did that happen? There must have been a mistake. You know how it is. Managing a household gives you so many things to worry about. She gestured to the other maids with a grand sweep of her arm. Everyone here can testify to how overworked I am. Isn't that right, everyone? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the other maids with a silent threat. The servants flinched, then quickly nodded in nervous agreement. That's right. Ms. Jenny has been exceptionally busy lately. One stammered. Lucian thought, a cynical smile touching his lips. They were too afraid to defy her. He turned on his heel. Let's go back, Hans. His servant was baffled. Huh, young master? Just like this? Lucian glanced back at the smug-head maid and the intimidated staff. The body is mine, he murmured to Hans, but the hands and feet are listening to someone else. He stopped at the threshold and turned back one last time. Headmaid, let me ask you one last thing. I hope you answer carefully. His voice dropped, becoming chillingly cold. Do you know who the master you're supposed to follow is? Jenny's smug grin widened into a triumphant sneer. She had won. Regarding that, I shall ask Lord Geordie. The challenge was made, the lines of allegiance drawn in the sand. Leaving the manor behind, Lucian walked through the dark, grimy streets of the city's underbelly. He thought, his resolve hardening like steel. He would not allow this corruption to spread. He and Hans, now cloaked and hooded, entered a dimly lit tavern. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap ale. Young master? Hans whispered, confused. Didn't you say we were going fishing to calm your mind? But this place is... From a room beyond, the roar of a crowd and the sickening thud of fists on flesh echoed. Men screamed encouragement and insults. Hey, you worthless hound, move it, one roared. I bet my entire salary on you today. Fight until you're at death's door. It was an illegal fighting pit, a den of vice and violence. Lucian looked at the brutal spectacle, his eyes gleaming with cold purpose under his hood. Don't you feel it? He asked Hans, a slight, dangerous smile playing on his lips. This is the perfect place to catch a big fish. They walked past the fighting ring and approached the bar, where a well-dressed man was polishing a glass. The bartender looked up, his expression one of bored annoyance. This isn't a place for kids like you to be snooping around. Scram while I'm being nice. Lucian simply tilted his head. Why is a gambling den being so picky? He pulled back his hood, revealing his sharp, golden eyes and a confident, predatory smile. The bartender froze, caught off guard by the boy's unnerving intensity. Lucian's voice was a low, challenging purr. What are you doing? Aren't you taking customers? Lucian considered his next move, his thoughts turning to the insidious network of spies within his own household. He knew he couldn't act rashly, especially concerning the head maid, Jenny. She was far more than a simple servant. As the daughter of Geordie's childhood nanny, she held a deep and protected connection to his older brother. To move against her carelessly would be to invite disaster and alert Geordie to his newfound capabilities. Furthermore, the entire command structure of his personal staff was a compromised mess, a chaotic web of disloyalty and incompetence. Servants who should have shown deference acted with an absurd familiarity, a clear sign that his authority was non-existent. This level of dysfunction was beyond mere negligence. It required a careful and strategic solution, not a brute force purge. Most importantly, Lucian was certain his father, the Archduke, was aware of the turmoil. This wasn't just a household issue, it was a test. Leaving this tangled mess for Lucian to sort out was a challenge to prove his worthiness as a Valdek. Standing by the window, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, a new resolve settled over him. A plan began to form, a calculated risk that would demonstrate his abilities and simultaneously build his resources. He thought, a confident smirk gracing his lips. At a high-stakes card table, his hands moved with impossible speed, shuffling and dealing with the grace of a master. He mused, his golden eyes gleaming with predatory intent. The whispers around the gambling den grew louder with every passing minute. A crowd had gathered, watching in stunned silence as the young noble dismantled his opponent. "How many rounds has he won in a row?" one spectator murmured. The player across from Lucian was a seasoned regular, yet he was being utterly crushed. Finally, breaking out in a cold sweat, the man threw his cards down, his nerve completely shattered. I quit." Lucian casually tossed a blue chip in the air, his expression one of mild disappointment. "Quitting already? It was just starting to get fun," he purred, his voice a low challenge. He leaned forward, a taunting smile playing on his lips. "Why not stay a bit longer?" Behind him, Hans was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack, clutching his head in disbelief. He wondered frantically, unfazed. Lucian leaned back in his chair, kicking his feet up onto a massive pile of winnings. "Next round," he called out to the silent room. "Isn't there anyone willing to play? I came here hearing the rumors, but is this all there is?" His eyes narrowed, scanning the room with a sharp, reptilian focus. This was never about the money or the small-time gamblers. This was a calculated provocation. He thought, his gaze fixed on the entrance. As if on cue, the heavy doors to the private room swung open with a resounding bang. A large, powerfully built man stepped through, his presence immediately silencing the remaining whispers. A slow, knowing smile spread across Lucian's face as he watched the newcomer adjust his collar. The big fish had taken the bait. The man approached the table, his demeanor calm but radiating an unmistakable aura of authority. Well, I failed to recognize someone important," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Please forgive me for my late greeting. I am Hugo, the manager of this establishment." With a subtle gesture, Hugo commanded his subordinates. One of the staff members immediately turned to the remaining patrons. "I apologize for any inconvenience," the staffer announced, bowing deeply. "Due to unavoidable circumstances, we'll be closed for today. The next time you visit, we will be sure to treat you generously." The room emptied quickly, leaving only Lucian, Hans, and Hugo's crew. Hugo watched them leave, a faint smile on his lips. "It may be inconvenient for our other customers, but that's a small price to pay," he said, his red eyes turning to Lucian. "As long as young Lord Lucian can enjoy his time comfortably." Lucian's grin sharpened. "It's been quite a while since I last went out. You have a good eye, but then again, you'd need that much intuition to make a living in this business." Hugo stood before the table, a picture of polite deference. "Once again, I apologize for my belated greeting." Lucian waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it. I just came for a light change of pace." Hugo's gaze drifted to the mountains of chips stacked before Lucian. "But it's truly astonishing, young lord. It's been a while since I've seen a guest who has stacked the pot this high. If it isn't too much trouble, would you mind if I were your opponent?" "You personally?" Lucian asked, his interest piqued. Hugo gave a self-deprecating smile. "Of course, I wouldn't stand a chance against the young lord. But as the manager here, I've picked up a few tricks." His eyes glinted with a hidden fire. "Won't it at least be enough to pass the time?" Hans frantically whispered in Lucian's ear, his face pale with terror. "Young master, let's go home now, please. You've already won so much money." His voice trembled as he looked at the manager. "I have a really bad feeling about that man. I've seen many scary people in the palace, so I know. Such a look is truly one of a kind." Lucian smirked to himself. His servant's instincts were sharp. Lucian knew exactly who this man was, not just a simple gambling den manager. He was Black Shark Hugo, a name destined to one day shake the very foundations of the criminal underworld. Lucian recalled the man's history. Hugo's journey began in the dark alleys, a life of violence where only brute strength mattered. But he was armed with more than just fists. He possessed a savage cunning that allowed him to rise through the ranks with terrifying speed, expanding his reach from simple thuggery to gambling, smuggling, and even contract killings. He became the undisputed king of the night, ruling the underworld of 5 territories. Later, using the chaos of the Empire's division as a stepping stone, he would seize power and declare himself a baron, reborn as one of the Empire's new warlords. But for now, Lucian thought, assessing his opponent. A predatory smile curled Lucian's lips, his own ambition burning just as brightly as Hugo's. This was the moment he had engineered, the reason he had come to this den of vipers. A metaphorical shark appeared behind him, its jaws gaping wide as his inner voice echoed with chilling purpose. A dealer stood by, laying out the cards. For the game, how about a simple card game? Hugo proposed, adding with a magnanimous air, also, I will not set an upper limit on the betting. I can't let the young lord, who personally came all this way, get bored. Lucian clapped his hands in delight, a stark contrast to Hans's horrified expression. That's what I'm talking about. I finally found someone who gets me. It is an honor, young lord, Hugo replied smoothly, though his inner thoughts were laced with contempt. He slid a card across the table, a cruel smile touching his lips. Hugo's mind raced, his initial plan evolving into something far more lucrative. A vicious, predatory grin spread across his face as he stared at the unsuspecting noble. Just as Hugo was about to begin, Lucian laughed as if remembering something. "Oh my, where's my head today?" he exclaimed, looking at Hugo. "It's nothing, really. But before we start, I have a question. Is that all right?" Masking his annoyance with a veneer of politeness, Hugo inclined his head. "Of course, young lord. I will answer you faithfully." Lucian leaned back, his tone conversational. "This might be our first time meeting, but I've quite taken a liking to you. You can tell a lot about a leader by his men's demeanor." He gestured around the well-run establishment. Managing an operation of this scale isn't easy, especially an illegal one. If you had crossed the line, we would have heard about it and eradicated you long ago. Hugo nodded. "I understand my place, and I make sure not to stir up trouble with my superiors." Lucian waved his hand nonchalantly. "Haha, no need to be so stiff. I may be from House Valdec, but we're not that stuffy of a bunch." He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, his smile turning sharp and unsettling. "So, I'd appreciate it if you answer me honestly. When do you plan to begin large-scale production?" Hugo's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What exactly are you talking about?" Lucian's smile didn't waver. "Come on, you know. That thing you're working on in Bestra." The final words dropped into the silent room like stones. Of course, the illegal hallucinogen. The air turned to ice. Hugo's face contorted, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock as Lucian's accusation struck him like a thunderbolt. Lucian's voice, devoid of any warmth, cut through the silence, each word a carefully placed stone that shattered Hugo's composure. "I'm talking about illegal hallucinogens." The accusation hung in the air, thick and undeniable. For a moment, the only sound was the sharp intake of breath from Hugo and his men, a collective gasp of disbelief and terror. Outside the room, the guards shifted nervously, sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere within. Inside, Hans's face was a mask of pure shock, his mind struggling to process the young lord's audacious move. Hugo, however, quickly tried to mask his panic, forcing a nervous smile as sweat beaded on his brow. "Why, young lord? What on earth are you talking about?" he stammered, feigning ignorance. "Hallucinogens? What is that?" Lucian remained perfectly calm, his fingers idly stacking a tower of poker chips as if discussing the weather. "You heard me clearly. Why ask back?" he purred, his smile never reaching his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "You were commissioned by the Marquis Logren family, weren't you? Tasked to shake up Waldeck with illegal drug distribution." He let out a soft, mocking sigh. To think a marquis would give such cheap instructions. There is a line that shouldn't be crossed. Lucian's gaze hardened, pinning Hugo in place with an intensity that belied his age. "Don't you agree, Hugo?" The direct question was a trap, leaving the cornered man flinching, with no room left to lie. Lucian's lips curled into a predatory grin, his tone shifting to one of feigned admiration. "No, In this case, it would be right to see you as the more impressive one, he mused, the compliment dripping with sarcasm. Where else could one see the audacity to dare commit such an act right in the heart of Waldeck territory? The playful facade vanished, replaced by a chillingly serious demeanor. The moment it goes wrong and you get caught, Lucian warned, his voice dropping low, everyone associated with Waldeck will try to tear you apart and kill you. Every single one of them, without exception. The threat was absolute, and the entire room fell into a deathly, terrified silence. Lucian thought, observing the man's unraveling composure. He knew the man was realizing the dire truth. Failure means death, and this whole plan has been completely exposed. The Marquis Lagran family, symbolized by the unpredictable Joker, was a volatile and dangerous enemy, and Lucian had just thrown himself into their game. Lucian's knowledge was his greatest weapon, a gift from a future he was now actively rewriting. He recalled, in that timeline, by the time the Grand Duke received a report and raided the base, Hugo had already vanished. Lucian mused with cold satisfaction. Snapping back to the present, Hugo began his desperate performance, pleading his case. Young lord, I think there is some misunderstanding. I am just a lowly guy making pennies at a small shop. Me, dealing with drugs? He feigned outrage, his voice rising in manufactured indignation. Surely, someone jealous of me spread a false rumor. If you give me a chance, I will uncover the source with my own hands. Lucian listened with an amused tilt of his head. A false rumor, you say? His voice was light, but his words were like hammer blows, dismantling Hugo's flimsy reality. Then, the rice mill you are backing is also just a normal shop, and this underground passage is just a secret escape route leading outside the castle? The game was over. Lucian's golden eyes narrowed, their sharp gaze cutting through all pretense. I will ask one last time. What stage are you at right now? A single bead of sweat traced a path down Hugo's temple. He knew. The crushing realization washed over him. With all escape routes cut off, Hugo's mind turned to the only option left, violence. His hand clenched into a fist, muscles tightening as a dark thought took hold. He wondered, his gaze flicking to the unguarded boy. One of his men, sensing his leader's intent, slowly reached for the hilt of a hidden dagger, ready to strike. As if reading his very thoughts, Lucian spoke without turning around, his voice calm, yet carrying an unmistakable threat. Think carefully before you act. Pawns trembled behind him, but Lucian's smirk only widened. Because the chip for this gamble is your own life. Lucian's words were a bucket of ice water, extinguishing Hugo's murderous impulse. He berated himself, a cold dread replacing his anger. The consequences of attacking a scion of the Waldeck family would be a fate worse than death. A horrifying vision of a torture table filled his mind, and he knew he would be begging for an end that would never come. His spirit shattered. Hugo's strength abandoned him. He fell from his chair, landing hard on his knees before the young lord. All defiance, all pride, was gone, replaced by the primal need to survive. Please spare me, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Even in his desperate state, Hugo's mind was sharp. He looked up, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I believe there is a reason you came to find me personally, he said, his voice steadying. Otherwise, my head would have flown off long ago. A slow, knowing smile spread across Lucian's face. The man was as perceptive as he'd hoped. Hugo bowed his head, surrendering completely. If you tell me to be a dog, I will be a dog, he cried out, his desperation turning into fervent promises. If you tell me to bark, I'll bark. If you tell me to crawl, I'll crawl. Please spare me, young lord. Seeing their leader prostrate himself, his men immediately followed suit, dropping to the floor in a show of total submission. Lucian calmly tapped a chip against the table, the small sound echoing in the silent room. Well, keeping a dog by my side isn't bad, he mused aloud, leaning back in his chair. I just happen to need some hands and feet to use. Relief washed over Hugo's face as he stammered his gratitude, promising to do anything he was ordered. Lucian rose to his feet, circling around the table to stand over the kneeling man. But you know, he began, his tone thoughtful. Isn't that a bit boring? He looked down at the formidable man before him. You're someone who wouldn't be satisfied with just being a hunting dog. He leaned in close, placing a hand on Hugo's shoulder. The gesture was disarmingly familiar, but his words were revolutionary. Hey, Hugo, he whispered, making an offer that would change the man's life forever. Don't you want to try becoming a knight? The question struck Hugo like lightning, leaving him utterly speechless. A flood of bitter memories surged through Hugo, but reality had crushed that dream long ago. No matter how much skill he built, no matter how many times he risked his life, he was always just a useful tool for the highborn nobles, forever trapped by his low birth. The question echoed again, stirring the ashes of his buried ambition. A wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over him, and he slammed his forehead to the wooden floor. He confessed the depth of his desire, a wish so powerful he would sell his very soul for it. Looking up with tears in his eyes, he asked with fragile hope, "Really? Can I become one?" Lucian's expression was solemn, his gaze unwavering as he made his vow. "I promise on the honor of the Waldeck family. If you possess the integrity and honor to not be ashamed of yourself in the future, mere status won't become a stumbling block." He extended his hand, not as a master to a servant, but as a leader to a follower. "Hugo, won't you live as a person, not a tool?" A few days later, the sun shone brightly on the opulent facade of the Waldeck ducal estate. Within its walls, a new chapter was about to begin, both for the house and for the man who had been given a second chance. The entire household staff stood assembled in a grand hall, buzzing with curiosity. The head maid and butler announced the arrival of a capable new talent hired from the outside. Lounging at the head of the room with his feet propped up, Lucian smirked. "Now, introduce yourself." Hugo stepped forward, no longer a gambling den boss, but a man with renewed purpose. Dressed in the formal attire of the Waldeck household, he clasped his hands and bowed. "I am Hugo, who will be assisting the young lord starting today." He looked up, his eyes burning with fierce loyalty. "I look forward to working with you, seniors." Within the opulent hall of the Waldeck estate, the staff stood assembled, their whispers a low hum of anxiety. At the head of the room, Lucian Waldeck had made himself comfortable, lounging in an ornate chair with a casual arrogance that set everyone on edge. Alongside the familiar faces of the household stood Hugo, the newly recruited subordinate, whose rugged presence seemed starkly out of place in the refined setting. With a sharp clap of his hands that cut through the murmuring, Lucian silenced the room. A self-assured smirk played on his lips as he surveyed the tense servants. "All right," he announced, his voice carrying an unnerving calm. "Now that we've finished with introductions, bring the head maid here." The head butler's face paled, his composure cracking under the weight of the unexpected command. "The head maid, you say?" he stammered, a note of panic in his voice. "Why are you bringing her here all of a sudden?" Lucian simply tilted his head, his smile unwavering. "Why else? The head maid should greet our new addition too, shouldn't she?" Elsewhere in the manor, two maids exchanged worried glances, their conversation hushed. The memory of a past transgression lingered, and the fear of being scolded again was palpable. Lucian watched the subtle shifts in the room, his golden eyes missing nothing. He thought, a flicker of cold calculation in his gaze. The head butler, seeing the staff's hesitation, tried to calm them, but his words were laced with his own fear. Lucian understood perfectly. The staff was deeply entrenched in the existing power structure, loyal not to him, but to the fear his brother Geordie inspired. To them, Lucian was nothing more than a rotten rope, a weak and unreliable master. He decided with chilling resolve. The butler stepped forward, his voice a desperate plea. "Young master, please consider our situation. You are aware, yes? Lord Geordie pays special attention to the head maid." His tone was a mix of warning and supplication, revealing the deep-seated terror Geordie commanded. "What power do we possibly have?" he asked, hoping to appeal to Lucian's reason. The butler's words ignited a fresh wave of panic among the staff. One servant angrily accused him of fanning the flames, while another cried out their desire to simply live quietly, to avoid the wrath of the second son. The entire hall was a portrait of fear and insubordination, a clear testament to how little authority Lucian currently held. But one voice rose above the fearful chatter. Hans, his loyalty a burning fire, stepped forward to admonish them. "All of you, get a grip. Have you completely forgotten your duties?" he roared. His words were a direct challenge to their cowardice. The master of this place is young Master Lucian, not the second young Master Geordie. As Hans's declaration hung in the air, Hugo moved, placing a reassuring hand on the young servant's shoulder. "Senior Hans, please leave this to me," he said, his voice a low rumble. He turned to face the mutinous staff, a predatory smirk spreading across his face. "Your sharp words seem too good for the likes of them to listen to." Hugo then turned to Lucian, his posture one of respectful readiness. "Young master, I have identified what I must do." Lucian's expression remained impassive. "My already?" Hugo's eyes glinted with a ruthless light. "For these people who don't know their place, drilling loyalty into them is a simple matter. However, it might get a little rough. I request your permission." A ghost of a smile touched Lucian's lips. He also reflected on his good fortune. Had Hugo's illicit drug trade been more advanced, he would have been beyond saving. Lucian gestured with a flick of his wrist. "Of course, I permit it. That's exactly what I wanted." The permission was given, the leash removed. "Don't worry," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "and give them a memorable lesson." Hugo's grin widened. "As you command." The head butler, overhearing the exchange, flinched as a palpable wave of dread washed over him. Hugo closed the distance to the head butler in 2 long strides, his immense frame casting a suffocating shadow. The butler felt a primal fear grip him, his heart pounding against his ribs. He thought, his throat suddenly dry. The sheer intimidation radiating from the former underground boss was overwhelming. Trying to rally his courage, the butler puffed out his chest, attempting a final, desperate power play. "Hey, you seem to be stepping up without knowing the situation," he sneered. "You'd be wise to pick the right side." He thought he could appeal to the man's baser instincts, treating him like a common thug for hire. He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you have any idea how cruel Lord Geordie is? You're not a fool who would risk his life for a few pennies, are you?" Hugo simply stared back, his expression unreadable, before speaking with chilling finality. "What pathetic last words." The butler's eyes widened in confusion. What do you mean?" His question was cut short by a brutal, lightning-fast punch. The sickening crack of bone and cartilage echoed through the silent hall as Hugo's fist connected squarely with the butler's jaw. The force of the blow sent the butler flying backward, his body tumbling through the air before landing in a heap several meters away. The assembled staff gasped in collective shock, their defiance instantly replaced by stark terror. From his throne, Lucian watched the display with a satisfied, almost playful smirk, the lesson proceeding exactly as planned. A heavy crash punctuated the scene as the butler's body finally came to a stop. He lay broken and unconscious on the polished floor, a trickle of blood staining his lips. Hugo stood over him, an immovable, terrifying monolith of absolute power, his message delivered without a single wasted word. The shockwave of violence broke the staff's paralysis, and the hall erupted into screams of panic. "What is this? Using violence," one man shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Hugo. Unfazed, Hugo slowly cracked his knuckles, a terrifying grin spreading across his face. "I have more than enough right," he growled, "because I specialize in educating insolent fools." The aftermath was swift. While Lucian calmly sipped his tea, the unconscious form of the head butler was unceremoniously dragged from the room. The chilling sound of his body scraping against the floor served as a grim warning to all who remained. The old order was being dismantled, piece by painful piece. Moments later, the main doors burst open again. 2 servants, their faces now masks of fear-driven obedience, hauled in a struggling, red-haired woman. It was the head maid, Jenny, and she was furious. "Let go of me," she screamed, thrashing wildly. "Do you still not get the situation?" One of her captors yelled back, his own terror fueling his harshness. Jenny was thrown to the floor before Lucian's chair. She pushed herself up, her eyes blazing with fury. "You dare raise your voice at me? I'll make you pay for." Her threat died on her lips as she took in the scene. She saw the terrified faces of her colleagues, the beaten men, and Lucian, sitting on high like a king. The servants who brought her bowed deeply. "Young Master Lucian," they stammered. "We've brought the head maid, Jenny." Lucian turned from the window, his expression one of pleasant surprise. "You're here?" he asked, his tone light and conversational, a stark and terrifying contrast to the violence that had just occurred. His casual demeanor was a weapon in itself, designed to unnerve and dominate. He gestured vaguely towards her. "I just asked them to bring you, but it seems everyone got a bit too enthusiastic." The blatant understatement was a mockery of her authority, a clear signal that her power in this household was now meaningless. Jenny could only grit her teeth, her face contorting with rage and disbelief. Unable to accept the reality before her, Jenny exploded. "What is the meaning of this? If you thought I would be scared, you are sorely mistaken," she shrieked, falling back on her one remaining shield. "Lord Geordie will never let this stand by." Lucian's smile never faltered, but his eyes grew cold. "Hey now, who said anything about concluding this?" He reached down and picked up a cruel-looking whip from a nearby table, its leather straps whispering through the air. His hand tightened around the handle. "It's just getting started." He fixed his gaze on the defiant head maid, his voice dropping to a low, lethal tone that promised only pain. "Head maid, say whatever you want." A heavy silence fell over the hall as he raised the whip, his final words sealing her fate. "Because today, you will die right here." Execution, a demonstrative method used since ancient times. It served as both a warning and an efficient means of control. Its justification was simple. With a clear target, it left an undeniable and lasting impression on all who witnessed it. This, Lucian mused, was all the justification he needed. His footsteps echoed through the grand hall of the Waldeck estate, each one a measured, deliberate beat of the coming judgment. He walked directly toward the head maid, Jenny, a cruel-looking whip held loosely in his hand. He stopped before her, the silence between them charged with unspoken threats and years of simmering resentment. Jenny's face contorted with fury and disbelief, her blue eyes blazing with indignation. Lucian's expression, however, remained chillingly calm, his gaze shadowed and unreadable. He thought to himself, "This is enough. With this, I can inform the Grand Duke that the weak and trashy third prince no longer exists." With a subtle flick of his fingers, Lucian gave the signal. In an instant, his men, led by Hugo, seized the unprepared head maid. They swiftly overpowered her struggles, forcing her to the polished floor in a heap of fabric and fury. Even while held captive, Jenny's arrogance did not wane. "Young master, you should think this through carefully," she sneered, her voice laced with venom. "You said you would kill me, but if you harm me, even a little, do you think Lord Geordie will stay quiet?" She played her final card, her voice rising with confidence. "My mother is Lord Geordie's wet nurse, which technically makes me his sibling." Lucian listened in silence, a faint, mocking smile playing on his lips. "Is that all you have to say?" he asked softly, his tone dripping with disappointment. "To keep bringing up your brother while you're dying. Isn't that just pathetic?" Lucian gestured for his men to hold her firm. "If you have anything else to say it now." Jenny began to stammer, falling back on her only defense. "So, as I said, Lord Geordie." Lucian cut her off, his voice hardening. "It seems you have seriously misunderstood this. I have more than enough reasons to kill you. From insulting a noble, neglecting your duties, incitement, embezzlement, and more." He leaned down, his face inches from hers, the golden eyes of House Waldeck piercing through her crumbling composure. "You seem to misunderstand your position just because you were raised by the same wet nurse. Do you really think the Geordie you keep babbling about can save you? At most, he would beat me a few times. Or worse for you, if Father steps in, he won't even be able to do that." A wicked, predatory grin spread across Lucian's face. Rather, Father might even reward me for properly dealing with a troublesome person." The last of Jenny's hope died in her eyes as Lucian's words sank in. "Geordie is just one of the heirs," he stated, his silhouette looming over her like a judge. "Just like the person standing before you. I already gave you a chance, but you're the one who made things turn out this way." Finally, terror broke through her pride. Her body trembled as she began to plead, "I was wrong, young master. Please forgive me." But Lucian merely turned away, his expression cold and resolute. Against a backdrop of blood red, he raised the whip high, his final words devoid of any mercy. "Blame your own bad luck." The whip sliced through the air, followed by the sickening crack of leather against flesh, and a scream that was abruptly cut short. Meanwhile, Geordie, the second prince, sprinted through the corridors of the main estate, his attendants struggling to keep pace. Panic and confusion warred on his face. "This can't be happening," he thought, his mind reeling. A few days ago, he was the one who backed down after being humiliated by Jenny. And now he's suddenly acting insane, saying he'll kill me? A darker realization dawned on him. That's not the only strange thing. Just in case, I had servants posted at the separate estate where Lucian resides. Those servants should have stopped him. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat as the terrible truth became clear. But since things have turned out like this, it means he has taken control of the servants. One of his men tried to placate him. "Young master, that report must be wrong. A person like him would never lay a hand on anyone. Besides, he's afraid of you, Lord Geordie." Geordie wanted to believe it, trying to convince himself it was all a mistake. But then, a piercing scream echoed from the hall ahead, and his blood ran cold. The doors to the grand hall were flung open, revealing a horrifying tableau. Lucian stood calmly, whip in hand, over the bloodied and broken form of Jenny. Geordie's face twisted in rage and disgust. "What in the world are you doing?" he roared, his voice shaking. Lucian slowly turned, his expression unbothered. "What brings my esteemed brother here? Sorry, but I'm busy right now. Please come back later." With a chilling finality, he added, "Today, I will tear out the root of this rebellion." Infuriated by the blatant disrespect, Geordie screamed at his knights, "Oliver, Gert, save Jenny right now." As Geordie's men charged forward, Lucian spoke a single name, his voice lethally low. "Hugo." He then issued a terrifying command. "If anyone comes within 3 feet of us, slash her throat." Without a flicker of hesitation, Hugo pressed a cold blade against Jenny's neck. Lucian met his brother's shocked gaze. "I will take full responsibility." Geordie's knights froze in their tracks, their advance halted by the glint of steel. Hugo's voice was a low growl, promising death. "There will be no chance for her to survive in any way. Leave it to me." The blade bit into Jenny's skin, and she let out a choked cry, her last hope fading. "Oh, Lord Geordie." Geordie turned his fury on Hugo, his voice cracking with desperation. "How dare you do this? If you do not obey my order, your entire family will be executed." But Hugo's loyalty was absolute. He stared back, unflinching. "That will never happen. My master is Lord Lucian. Any order not given by my master means nothing to me." His eyes, burning with a fanatical red glow, held a terrifying conviction. "Whatever happens from here on, if it is my master's order, carrying it out is my duty." Trembling with impotent rage, Geordie finally confronted his younger brother. "Lucian, what did Jenny do to deserve being treated like this?" Lucian gently ran his fingers over the blood-stained whip. "She insulted her superior, defied orders, and interfered with financial matters," he listed calmly. "I merely gave her the punishment she deserved." He then looked up, a faint smear of blood on his cheek, his golden eyes filled with cold disappointment. "Don't you understand the difference between duty and personal emotion?" Geordie could only stare, utterly defeated. Within the storied and shadowed halls of House Valdec, a silent war was being waged. At its center was the ducal throne, a symbol of absolute power coveted by 2 brothers. The first young master, Tristan Valdec, was a figure of solemn ambition, while the second young master, Geordie Valdec, possessed a sharp and fiery temperament. Their rivalry was the axis upon which the family's future turned, a bitter and relentless succession war. For Geordie, this was a moment of profound crisis. He had just been publicly bested and humiliated by his younger, often underestimated brother, Lucian. The defeat cost him more than pride. He was forced to cast aside his loyal knight, Sir Hendrik, a blow to his military and political standing. Now, facing another direct challenge, he knew that failing to protect Ginny, a servant who was essentially his eyes and ears, would be catastrophic. Geordie glanced at the faces of his followers, their features obscured by shadow, their loyalty now a fragile, uncertain thing. He understood the precipice on which he stood. Another failure would shatter their trust completely, turning them against him. Clenching his fist, he swallowed the bitter taste of defeat and spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "You win. Let her go." The surrender hung in the air for only a moment before Lucian's will was put into motion. At his side, the newly recruited Hugo moved with terrifying speed, grabbing the weeping headmaid, Ginny. Hans, another of Lucian's men, could only gasp in shock at the brutal efficiency. With a cold, metallic glint, Hugo pressed a dagger to Ginny's throat, his expression devoid of mercy, ready to carry out any order. Lucian turned, his back to the grim scene, a faint smear of blood accentuating his cheek. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. "That's not even funny," he purred, his voice dripping with condescending disbelief. "You intend to just sweep this under the rug with a single word?" His gaze hardened, locking onto his brother. "After ransacking someone else's precious livelihood, do you think your tongue is painted with gold?" Lucian's tone was sharp, cutting through Geordie's attempt to de-escalate. Feigning confusion, he tilted his head. "What are you talking about, brother?" "When? I merely fulfilled my duties as the third young master." Lucian masterfully framed his actions not as a power play, but as an act of justice. "Besides, embezzlement is a crime no one can escape, regardless of status," he declared, stepping towards the kneeling maid. "If we were to just cover this up, what would everyone think?" He looked back at Geordie with false sincerity. "Since my respected brother asks so earnestly, I too would like to drop the matter here, but I lack the justification to do so." Geordie's composure finally snapped. His hand trembled in a clenched fist, his face a mask of fury. He had been played, cornered, and made a fool of. "Stop talking in circles and speak plainly," he snarled, his voice tight with rage. "What do you want?" Lucian's gaze drifted to the terrified Ginny, his voice dropping to a calm, lecture-like tone. Since ancient times, those who laid hands on others' property have generally received similar punishments. Ginny's eyes widened in horror as tears streamed down her face. Lucian's eyes narrowed, his words delivering the final blow, coughing up several times the stolen amount. A wide, predatory grin split Lucian's face as the illusion of golden coins rained down around him. The pretense of justice and duty fell away, revealing the raw, avaricious gold beneath. He made an okay sign with his fingers, his eyes alight with triumph. "Brother, what price did you have in mind?" Days later, within the magnificent Valdec estate, Duke Valdec stood alone in his sunlit office. He was a man of immense presence and authority, the undisputed patriarch of the powerful house. A report had reached him detailing the conclusion of the conflict between his sons. And so, the incident was settled, but the ripples it created were only just beginning to spread. The head butler stood before the Duke's desk, presenting the official report. The Duke picked up the papers, his expression unreadable as he scanned the contents. His sharp, discerning eyes flickered over the words before he looked up, his gaze piercing. "Head butler, is this report true?" With a calm and steady voice, the butler confirmed every detail. "I confirmed it personally. Master Geordie paid young Master Lucian 10 times the invested amount as compensation." He continued, his tone respectful but firm. "And young Master Lucian has recruited an outsider known as Hugo to swiftly root out the spies planted in his annex." The butler concluded his report with a final, crucial piece of information. As a result, young Master Lucian's annex is currently more heavily guarded than any other area. The Duke remained silent, gazing at his own reflection in the window. A complex mix of emotions played across his features: calculation, surprise, and perhaps even a flicker of pride. A sharp knock echoed through the quiet office. "Enter," the Duke commanded, his voice a low rumble. The grand door swung open, and Lucian stepped inside, his posture one of perfect filial respect. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. "I heard you summon me, father." The Duke turned from the window, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. As he faced his youngest son, Lucian felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. There was a new intensity in his father's gaze, a weight and sharpness that hadn't been there before. This was not just a father looking at his son, it was a sovereign evaluating a contender. "You caused quite a stir recently," the Duke began, his tone neutral. Lucian met his father's gaze without flinching, his own expression serene. "It was nothing grand," he replied smoothly. "I merely disciplined servants who could not recognize their own master." The Duke's hand rested on his desk, his voice taking on a harder edge. "However, as a result, you disgraced your brother. He will not forget this for a long time. Can you handle the consequences?" Lucian's confidence was unshakable. "There is nothing to handle. It was simply a matter of setting the hierarchy and order straight." A brilliant light seemed to emanate from Lucian as he spoke, his conviction absolute. "If I were to avoid even such obvious duties for fear of backlash, how could I ever dare claim the name of Valdek?" he declared, his voice ringing with righteous power. "I simply made a choice that would not bring shame to our name." The Duke listened, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. A faint smile touched his lips, hidden beneath his beard. His decision was made. If Geordie continues to pick fights with you, you are free to strike back. But the Duke's permission came with a stark warning. "However, if the conflict escalates too far and harms the family, I will side with Geordie, regardless of who is right or wrong." The words struck Lucian with the force of a physical blow, his composure finally breaking. "Pardon? Father, what on earth do you?" "Why are you so surprised?" the Duke asked, a knowing look in his eyes. He explained his cold logic. Geordie, for all his rashness, had made significant contributions to the family. Lucian, by contrast, had idled away for a year. As the family head, choosing the one who has contributed to the family is only natural logic, is it not? Lucian fell silent, his mind racing to decipher the true meaning behind his father's words. He touched his chin thoughtfully, his sharp intellect piecing together the puzzle. This wasn't a threat or a statement of preference. It was a challenge. "If I am not mistaken," he murmured, "that sounds like an instruction to trample on my brother and rise up." The Duke's expression confirmed Lucian's assessment. He leaned against his desk, his gaze fixed on his son. "Build your strength and become an asset to the family," he commanded. "Then you will know the answer to your question." A slow smile of understanding spread across Lucian's face. He saw the method in his father's harshness. He intended to heighten the sense of crisis to drive him forward, to force him to grow stronger. This was his father's way of showing concern, a convoluted push to hurry and seize the opportunity before the succession was decided and his chance was lost forever. Tucking an envelope securely inside his tunic, Lucian's demeanor shifted from contemplative to predatory. "By the way, father," he began, capturing the Duke's attention. He strode forward and slapped a document onto the desk. "What if I have already prepared a move? A very big one at that." Inside the Duke's vast office, Lucian stood before his father, presenting the report that was the culmination of his recent efforts. The Duke held the crumpled papers, his expression a mask of stern skepticism. "Is this report truly accurate?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "If you are exaggerating for the sake of merit, tell me now." Lucian met his father's gaze without an ounce of fear, his resolve unshakable. "It contains nothing but the truth." Lucian pressed his advantage. "Furthermore, following the orders of House Logran, I have secured the insider who has been moving the drugs. You can verify it immediately." The moment the rival house's name was spoken, the atmosphere in the room changed. An immense, suffocating pressure erupted from the Duke, a palpable wave of fury that seemed to bend the very air around Lucian, who braced himself against the overwhelming force of his father's wrath. The Duke's voice was a low growl, vibrating with unrestrained anger. "Bernhardt, that shameless son of a marquis," he seethed, his eyes burning with cold fire. He dares try to defile the Valdec territories? The sheer force of his presence was a testament to his power, the legendary sword that protected the Empire. His fury was not directed at his son, but at the enemy who had trespassed upon his domain. Lucian struggled to breathe under the weight of his father's aura, a cold sweat beading on his brow. This was the true power of the master of House Valdec, a force that could crush lesser men with its intensity alone. Taking a steadying breath, he waited for the initial storm of rage to pass before speaking. "Father, may I dare to speak one more word?" The Duke's attention snapped back to him. "What is it?" Lucian calmly laid out the political chessboard. "Even if we report this to His Majesty, House Logran will surely cut off their tail to escape. All their involvement was through subordinate guilds, leaving no direct trace." He paused, letting the strategic reality sink in. "Furthermore, since His Majesty is wary of clashes between factions, an imperial intervention will inevitably occur, preventing us from seeking true justice." The Duke's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise in them. When had his son's eye for judging the political situation become so sharp? Lucian brought his point home, a cold smile touching his lips. In other words, despite committing such an atrocious act against House Valdec, it would end with them just losing a source of income. On a metaphorical chessboard, the pieces of their rivals lay shattered. Shouldn't we at least take an arm in return? The tension in the Grand Office returned, though this time it was one of anticipation. The Duke leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I need an explanation. What do you have in mind?" Lucian's smile widened, filled with predatory confidence. "A way to ensure they cannot escape," he stated plainly. "And I have already secured it." Lucian revealed his trump card. "Not long ago, an insider surrendered to me." An image of Hugo and his men kneeling in submission flashed through his mind. He has no title, but he earned Logran's deep trust and rose to the rank of executive. The Duke's mind immediately connected this to the head butler's report of Lucian recruiting an outsider named Hugo. He stared at his son, a stunning realization dawning on him. Did the third son anticipate this situation from the very beginning? The Duke tapped his fingers on the desk, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You mean to use a traitor to set a counter-trap?" Lucian gave a slight nod. "That is correct. From their perspective, it is difficult to expect an executive who handled the drugs to betray them. I've made arrangements to make them believe their plans are proceeding smoothly, which will soon force a key figure from House Logran to step forward personally." The Duke listened, his expression unreadable. "That is not an opinion to be taken lightly," he conceded, before pointing out the critical weakness. "However, there is a massive flaw in your plan. The fact that you are betting everything on a single variable, on a traitor from the back alleys." He leaned back, his voice a grim warning. "Human nature cannot be defied, Lucian. With someone who cannot be trusted, you won't be able to take even a single step together." Lucian remained silent for a long moment, absorbing his father's cautionary words. "I am not trusting the man," he finally said, his voice firm. "Rather, I bet on the desire he possesses." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "Desire?" Lucian's gaze turned distant as he recalled Hugo's burning ambition. He said he wanted to become a knight, spread his fame across the Empire, and carve his name into history. The Duke scoffed, a remark that forgets one's place. But Lucian's conviction didn't waver. But for a man, it is also a dream one craves madly. A confident, almost brilliant smile lit up his face, his golden eyes sparkling with a knowing light. "I will believe in that very dream, just as I did in my past life." "That is a truly sentimental reason," the Duke remarked dryly. "What will you do if he ruins everything?" Lucian's smile faded, replaced by an expression of absolute resolve. "If that happens, I have no intention of avoiding responsibility. My person's mistake is ultimately my mistake." His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. "I will pay the price, even if I have to stake my own neck." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the slight creak of the Duke's chair as he leaned back, studying his son with a newfound respect. The gamble, the reasoning, the acceptance of consequence. It was the bearing of a true leader. "Once your body recovers, come out to the training grounds." Lucian looked up, confused. Pardon. The Duke's next words were a thunderclap that changed everything. I will teach you the Lionheart sword, since now you are also one of the candidates for the next head of the house. Later that night, in the quiet solitude of the ducal library, the Duke met with his head butler. The loyal servant bowed his head, his face a mask of contrition. I am truly ashamed, master, that here in Kelheim, the heart of the House of Valdek, I failed to prevent such things from being committed. The Duke held up a hand, silencing him. Enough. It was I who made you focus on the border issues. I know better than anyone that your body is barely holding up from that work alone. He looked away, contemplative. We must see that the third son discovering it first was purely a matter of luck. The butler, however, corrected him. It seems his objective was not money or expanding influence, but rather strongly intended to tarnish your honor, master. He likely intended to use this as a pretext to play tricks with His Majesty later. The Duke grunted in disgust. Knowing full well the situation of the Empire, how can a marquis be blinded only by his own safety? His thoughts then shifted to the key player in his son's scheme. More importantly, what kind of man is this Hugo? The butler provided the intelligence summary. On the surface, a ruffian managing a gambling den. In reality, the head of a fledgling underworld organization that even others marveled at. To personally seek out and subdue such a man, the young master's growth is truly surprising. The Duke stood in silence, processing the information. Growth, you say? He knew the underworld. A man like Hugo, who stood out where cunning and cruelty run rampant, would not be swayed by simple dreams. He would have been trampled to death long ago if he were so naive. The Duke came to a single, powerful conclusion. Hugo must have seen Lucian's true potential, recognizing him as a liege lord worth staking his very life on. Having made his decision, the Duke addressed his butler. It is earlier than planned, but since the third son has shown his ability, I intend to open the path for him accordingly. Starting tomorrow, I will teach him the family's secret techniques. The butler smiled. A wise decision. Do you have someone in mind as his swordsmanship teacher? The Duke's gaze was firm. I will ask Sir Eisen. A flicker of shock crossed the butler's face. The name hung in the air, heavy with significance. It is regrettable to break his seclusion in his later years, the Duke mused, his thoughts drifting to a remote and tranquil place. Far from the politics of the capital, in a forest bathed in serene blue light, a legendary figure sat in meditation. His power was a quiet storm, his sword resting before him, awaiting the call that would soon come. That night, under the brilliant full moon, the news of Lucian's ascension echoed through the Valdek estate. Inside, his loyal aide, Hans, was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he grabbed his young master, his voice trembling with a joy so profound it bordered on hysteria. Is it really true? You're not joking, are you? You've truly become an official successor candidate. Lucian, unaccustomed to such overt displays, winced at the boy's wailing. How many times do I have to say yes for you to believe me, Hans? He groaned, looking to his new subordinate for aid. Hugo, do something about this kid. With a calm that seemed unshakable, Hugo stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Hans's shoulder, his presence alone enough to quiet the outburst. Senior, please calm down, he said, his voice a steady anchor. Given the young master's qualities, isn't this a natural progression? Hugo's gaze was serious as he continued, his words carrying an unexpected weight. Considering the path he will walk in the future, it won't do for a senior who's his right-hand man to be this shaken up. The statement struck Hans with the force of a physical blow, silencing him completely. The title, the responsibility, it was a destiny he had never dared to imagine for himself. A deep blush spread across Hans's face as he flailed in Hugo's grip, utterly flustered. Oh, come on. What do you mean, right-hand man? He stammered, trying to deflect the honor. I'm still lacking in so many ways. Besides, with an outstanding talent like you here, Junior, how could I be? Lucian watched the exchange with a fond, knowing smile, while Hugo effortlessly held the struggling boy aloft. Humble as always. As expected of Senior Hans, Lucian mused. Lucian's expression turned from amused to contemplative as he thought to himself. Hugo, experienced hires really are different. He then addressed them both, his tone now that of a commander assessing his troops. Hans. What Hugo said isn't wrong. Hans is timid, and his frail nature could become a weakness. Lucian's inner analysis continued, seeing past the surface to the core of the young man's character. However, he thought, he truly cares for me, and he has the grit to steadfastly stay by my side even in the most adverse conditions. If he gains experience and grows into a talent capable of managing internal affairs, he'll become a more reliable rearguard than anyone else. His gaze then shifted to the stoic man beside Hans. Also, there's no room to doubt Hugo's ability, Lucian planned. I just need to open the path for him to become a knight. Only then can I draw out his abilities to the fullest. In his mind's eye, he saw Hugo clad in steel, a powerful sword serving as his vanguard in the battles to come. Lucian's grand design began to crystallize. It was a time to prioritize quality over quantity, to carefully forge a small, unbreakable unit. He envisioned the three of them, a strategist, a sword, and a shield, standing together against the world. A confident smile touched his lips. It's going to get very busy from now on. He looked at his two retainers, his golden eyes filled with conviction. The road ahead is a journey I cannot navigate alone, and it can only be completed together with you. Hugo's red eyes glowed with fierce loyalty, his hand clenching into a fist. I will not disappoint you, young master. Hans, his earlier panic replaced with burning determination, nodded vigorously. Yes, young master. Just leave it to us. The next morning, in a secluded training hall of the ducal estate, Lucian stood alone. The vast, empty space was silent save for the crackling of torches. Dressed in simple training clothes, he centered himself in the arena, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes, preparing his mind for what was to come. His thoughts drifted back to a harsher time, to his past life. He remembered scouring every corner of the frozen, unforgiving continent, searching for a single thing, the essence of the ancestors' martial arts, the legendary sword forms. His obsession had been singular, a desperate hunt for the highest echelon of swordsmanship, the advanced sword forms. But after enduring unimaginable hardship, what he finally obtained was not the treasure he craved. It wasn't the advanced forms, nor even the intermediate forms reserved for knight captains. It was a mere degraded version used by apprentice knights. In a world ruled by bloodlines, for a common mercenary to even learn a sword form was a miracle, but it was a bitter prize. The memories were a brand of failure seared into his soul. He remembered the countless times he was overwhelmed by nobles wielding superior techniques, the agony of failing to protect his comrades. That torment, that insatiable thirst for the power he was denied, echoed into the present as his hand clenched into a tight, trembling fist. But that life was over. An unexpected, unbelievable opportunity had come. A privilege passed down only to the successor candidates of House Valdek and their closest aides. He now had the chance to learn an ancient sword form that far surpassed the advanced forms he once coveted, the legendary Lionheart sword. A wave of pure excitement washed over him, making his heart pound in his chest. How amazing must this swordsmanship be, he wondered, feeling almost giddy. He had been pacing the hall since dawn, far too tense and eager to wait. Deciding it was best to calm his mind, he lowered himself to the floor to meditate. In my past life, he reflected, I learned by stealing techniques, by picking up scraps of knowledge. I never had anyone to call a master. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips as he sat in the silent hall. Living a second life really is something. This time, he would not be a scavenger. He would be an heir to a legacy. From a balcony high above, an old man with a mane of white hair observed the boy below. Sir Eisen watched Lucian's still form, his gaze sharp and analytical. A considerable amount of time has passed, the old master noted internally, and yet, he hasn't wavered a single bit. Sir Eisen stroked his beard, his mind flashing back to an image of a younger, timid Lucian hiding behind his mother. Was there some kind of trigger? He mused. I don't see his past weak self at all. The boy meditating with such profound focus was an entirely different person. The scene shifted to the previous evening, in a dimly lit chamber. Duke Valdek sat across from the legendary swordsman. "Sir Eisen, could you become Lucian's swordsmanship teacher?" the Duke had asked. He swirled the wine in his goblet. "I thought there was no hope, but looking again, there are aspects worth noting. It will also serve as a brief entertainment for you, sir." Sir Eisen had taken a sip from his own cup, his expression unreadable. If your grace says so, his talent must not be ordinary. The Duke shook his head slightly. "Talent, you say?" More than anything, his mindset was unexpected. Sir Eisen looked up, his interest finally peaked. The Duke simply said, "You'll know what I mean when you see it." Back in the present, a faint, knowing smile creased Sir Eisen's face as he looked down at his new student. The Duke had been right. This was no ordinary boy. The legendary sword saint, Eisen Breitner, had found a challenge worthy of his seclusion. A new legend was about to be forged. The title of Sword Saint was not one given lightly. It was a supreme designation for a superhuman who had awakened by pushing the art of circulation to its absolute limits, achieving the pinnacle of all sword forms. Such beings were exceptionally rare in the Empire's long and storied history. Regarded less as men and more as living gods among swordsmen, their existence a legend in itself. Lucian stood frozen in the grand hall, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. Such a legendary figure is right in front of my eyes. His golden eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed upon the man his father had chosen as his teacher. A cold sweat trickled down his temple. This was a development far beyond anything he could have anticipated. The man before him was the myth made flesh, Sword Saint Eisen Breitner. He stood with a quiet confidence that belied his immense power, his silver hair and weathered features speaking of countless battles. "It is the first time I've seen you since His Grace's birthday a few years ago, third young master," Eisen said, his voice calm and steady. "I am the one who will be teaching you starting today. My name is Eisen Breitner." Lucian's mind raced, piecing together the morning's events. "Hans did give me a hint this morning," he recalled, "that I'd be learning from a knight who has served the Valdek family since the previous generation." The servant's words had been a massive understatement. Lucian berated himself internally. How could he leave out the fact that it's the Sword Saint? Pushing his shock aside, Lucian composed himself and offered a deep, respectful bow. "It is an honor to receive teachings from the Sword Saint. I look forward to your guidance." Eisen simply waved a hand dismissively, a wry smile on his face. "I am merely hidden behind an undeserved title," he replied humbly. "I am nothing more than an old man." Eisen's gaze sharpened slightly, testing his new student. "Furthermore, the third young master is a successor candidate. So how can you bow your head so easily?" Lucian straightened, his answer immediate and sincere. "Although I cannot lower the status of the family, how could I neglect showing proper respect?" he stated firmly. "Setting aside the master-servant relationship, you are someone worthy of respect, sir." Lucian's earnest and mature response took Eisen by surprise, and the old master couldn't help but be charmed. He let out a soft chuckle. "If you insist, please do as you feel comfortable, young master." Lucian beamed. "Thank you for understanding," he said, his eagerness palpable. Eisen turned, a new energy in his step. "Then, let us begin the training immediately." They stood in the vast, open courtyard of the estate. Eisen gestured towards the expansive grounds. "Third young master, would you like to run around the outdoor training grounds?" Without a single word or moment of hesitation, Lucian dropped into a runner's crouch, his eyes blazing with determination. "Should I start right now?" he asked, poised to explode into motion. Eisen held up a hand, momentarily taken aback by the boy's explosive readiness. "Third young master, please wait a moment." Lucian looked up, confused. "Yes? Is something wrong?" The Sword Saint studied him, a curious glint in his eye. "Do you not have any questions?" he asked. "Why you are running, or how long? I mean, what meaning there is in this activity?" A confident smile touched Lucian's lips. "I am curious, indeed," he admitted. "But didn't you order it because it is necessary? There must be a reason why you didn't feel the need to explain." He placed a hand over his heart, his conviction absolute. A student receiving teachings simply follows the master's words. Aizen's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His reaction and gaze are distinctly different from the other young masters, he thought, a deep sense of understanding dawning on him. This child has a pure, unadulterated longing for the sword. He finally understood what the Duke had meant. Very well, third young master, he said, his voice filled with newfound respect. Then let us begin right away. With his master's approval, Lucian launched himself forward, his blonde hair streaming behind him. He ran with a focused intensity, his feet pounding against the stone courtyard with a steady rhythm. From a balcony above, Aizen watched the solitary figure circling the vast grounds, a silent observer to the first trial of his new, perplexing student. As he ran, Lucian's mind was sharp and clear. He knew this wasn't mere physical conditioning. It's because I guessed the true purpose of this run, he thought. It is to measure my qualifications as a disciple. In other words, gauging my potential. He understood that the simplest tasks often revealed the most. His mind drifted back to his past life, to his days as a mercenary captain standing in a dusty stable. I used to use a similar method back when I was a mercenary captain. He remembered assigning trivial-looking tasks to new recruits. Just from their reaction and attitude, he recalled, you could learn a lot about them. Their complaints, their obedience, their spirit, it all came to the surface. Connecting his past wisdom to his present test, Lucian's resolve hardened. Sir Aizen was watching, evaluating him not just as a noble son, but as a potential swordsman. Since I showed my mindset with a pretty good answer, now only one thing remains, he determined, his expression fierce. Tenacity. I'll run until I pass out. An hour passed, yet Lucian's pace never faltered. Suddenly, a wave of confusion washed over him. He murmured, looking at his own hands as if they were alien to him. What is this? This can't be right. He had been running with every ounce of his being, yet an impossible reality dawned on him. I'm not tired at all. He focused on the sensation, on the steady pump of his legs and the air in his lungs. It was completely illogical. Rather, the more I run, he realized with a jolt, it feels like my body is getting lighter. A strange, invigorating energy flowed through him, making each step easier than the last, propelling him forward as if he could run forever. He desperately searched for a reason for this phenomenon, but found none. All I did to recover my body was consuming mass-produced nectar, he thought, his bewilderment growing. And my only exercise was taking walks. How is this possible? His current stamina defied everything he knew about his own frail body, leaving him running in a state of profound confusion. From his vantage point, Aizen watched with growing disbelief. He let out a short, sharp breath. Making him run was only to gauge the third young master's general state. I didn't have high expectations for his physical abilities, but what he was witnessing shattered all expectations. This defies logic. The old master's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing every detail. Not a single drop of sweat was flowing from the boy's body, and his breathing remained as calm and even as a still lake. Aizen's hand tightened into a fist at his side. Even for a knight who has trained their mana for a long time, maintaining this level isn't easy. As Lucian continued his effortless lap, his eyes closed in a state of serene focus. A startling possibility struck Aizen. Could it be? The sword saint strode down to the training ground. Stop! Let's end the running here, he commanded. Lucian halted, his expression one of mild confusion. Did something happen? A faint, powerful blue aura began to emanate from Aizen as he faced his student. He dispensed with all pleasantries, his voice low and serious. Third young master, I have one question for you, he began. This morning, the action you took to calm your mind and body, was it circulation, not meditation? Lucian met his master's intense gaze without flinching. If you were talking about what happened at the indoor training grounds, yes, as you said, I performed circulation, he confirmed casually. There's nothing better for clearing one's thoughts. A bead of sweat ran down Aizen's temple. He hadn't just been right. The truth was more shocking than his wildest guess. Aizen stepped forward, his expression grave. Pardon me, but I will examine your physical condition for a moment. He reached for Lucian's wrist. Even if you feel something strange, please do not move. Taking the boy's hand, the sword saint channeled his own mana, a flowing river of blue energy, into Lucian's body to probe the depths of his power. As his mana explored Lucian's core, Aizen's face contorted in sheer, unadulterated shock. The torrent of information flowing back to him was impossible, a paradox of power that made his mind reel. A massive surge of blue energy erupted from him as the staggering truth of Lucian's condition became clear. The world seemed to fall away, replaced by an endless ocean of stars. I had my suspicions. Aizen thought, his consciousness adrift in the face of this revelation. But you have already reached the end of circulation, just like me. He was looking at a boy who had, impossibly, achieved the same ultimate state that had taken him a lifetime of relentless training to reach. But his shock deepened into awe. However, that is not the end in his case. It's beyond the realm I reached. A pillar of brilliant, celestial light erupted from the depths of Lucian's being, stretching into the heavens. The Sword Saint could only stand and witness a miracle. This child is opening a new path. In the sun-drenched training grounds of the Valdec estate, Sir Aizen Breitner, the legendary Sword Saint, stood before his new student. As a preliminary assessment, he reached out and lightly touched Lucian's wrist, intending to gauge his mana flow. The instant their skin met, Aizen's mind was flooded with an impossible truth. The Sword Saint's composure shattered, his eyes widening in disbelief. His voice, usually a calm river, was now a turbulent storm of shock. Third son, just when exactly did you reach the end of circulation? Lucian, feigning ignorance, looked puzzled. Pardon? Reached the end? What do you mean? Aizen explained what he had just witnessed, his voice filled with awe. I examined your body's condition a moment ago. The purity of your mana was like the first snow on a vast, untouched field. The interior of your being is formed in a shape perfect for maximizing mana efficiency to its absolute limit. Just like a water wheel, endlessly turning. A colossal wave of spiritual energy crashed in his mind, visualizing the perfection of Lucian's core. The Sword Saint's gaze was heavy with the weight of his discovery. This is a stage that only a tiny minority of martial artists, those who have trained their entire lives, can ever hope to reach. Lucian knew it was time to reveal a fraction of his secret. I anticipated he'd be surprised, he thought, but his reaction tells me my condition is even more perfect than I realized. In that case, there is no need to hide it any longer. Lucian met his teacher's intense gaze. I, too, had many questions about my body's condition. Unless one is at the stage of a Sword Saint, it is a problem no one else can answer. He paused, letting the statement sink in before delivering the final, unbelievable truth. To answer your question, it has been about a month since I started circulation, and all my mana paths were open from the very beginning. Aizen's green eyes, which had seen countless battles and lifetimes of training, trembled. A month. No pain. No blockages. It was a statement that defied all known principles of martial arts. He turned away, processing the revelation. You far exceed my expectations. Even I only reached this point after decades of perseverance. Perhaps the ancient swordsmen said to split mountains and seas were not legends, but truth. The Sword Saint faced his student, his expression grave and decided. Third son, I wish to speak, even at the risk of disrespect. He took a breath, the air crackling with the gravity of his next words. Would you be willing to give up the successor position of House Valdec? The question struck Lucian like a physical blow. Sir Aizen, what are you saying? Give up the successor position? He reeled back, a flash of panic crossing his face as he played the part of a confused youth. Is there some problem with my body? Like I can't learn sword forms? Or something terrible happens if I use mana? A small, rare smile touched Aizen's lips. It is the exact opposite. Your body is truly an ideal vessel. His voice resonated with profound meaning as he envisioned a tree of pure golden mana. Not only can you draw out the efficiency of mana and the body to the limit, but you also possess the potential to see beyond that. Aizen's words painted a breathtaking future for Lucian. In other words, if you focus solely on the sword, then becoming the next sword saint will not be an issue for you. The world seemed to fall away as Lucian absorbed the proposition. Me, step into the realm of a sword saint. The very pinnacle of power he had yearned for in his past life was now being offered to him. His mind raced, weighing the offer. I knew my body was extraordinary, but this is far beyond my expectations. He recalled his previous life struggles, the endless pursuit of strength. Thanks to the fortune of learning the ancient John Hart sword form, I thought I had finally gained a path to reach the stage I had yearned for. An image of a man climbing a treacherous peak filled his thoughts, an eagle soaring into the sun. But to be able to look beyond that, to the very pinnacle of the sword itself, it was a destiny beyond his wildest dreams, a path to godhood laid at his feet. However, he concluded grimly, it seems I cannot obtain it easily. He looked up at Aizen, his expression clearing as he made his choice. Is the reason you mentioned choosing one or the other because I cannot pursue both the path of the successor and the sword saint? Aizen's stern expression confirmed it. That is correct, third son. Aizen held up his weathered hand, a testament to a century of dedication. To be precise, it is because I do not have enough time left. Thanks to the power of circulation, I can move like this even at nearly 100 years old, but I can no longer deny the gradual aging of my body. To pass down everything while I am still alive would be a tight schedule even if you focused solely on the sword. Lucian's mind calculated with cold precision. If my memory is correct, the sword saint passes away in 8 years. There isn't much time left. He weighed his options. Ideally, I would accept his offer and focus on the sword. However, a vision of a war-torn future, of battlefields littered with broken banners and skulls, flashed before his eyes. The turbulent times of the future are a world that cannot be navigated by martial power alone. Those who survived that chaos were all those who possessed legitimacy. He clenched his fist, the dream of ultimate power clashing with the harsh reality of his goals. It is a moment I have longed for so much, but he bowed his head respectfully. I apologize, Sir Aizen. I wish to remain a Valdek to the end. You have given me an offer beyond my station, and I am sorry that I cannot accept it. Aizen's expression softened not with anger, but with a wistful melancholy. It is I who am truly ashamed for putting the third son in a difficult position. He turned away, a moment of self-reflection in his eyes. What was I doing in my youth, that I am being greedy now that I am old? Through you, it seems I wanted to leave something of mine in this world. Lucian watched the old master, a new plan forming in his mind. He smiled, a glint of cunning in his golden eyes. Sir Aizen, by any chance, if there were another talented individual besides me, what would you do? The scene shifted to a riding ground, where a young man in a green riding coat expertly handled his rearing horse. A portly butler ran towards him, waving a piece of paper frantically. The air was thick with urgency as the horse's hooves thundered against the dirt. The butler, out of breath, shouted the news. Young master, the news about the third son has been confirmed as fact. The young man pulled his reins sharply. What? So, those ridiculous stories were real? That moron was recognized as a new successor candidate. This was House Valdek's fourth son, Joshua Valdek. His attendant confirmed the worst of the rumors. It was exactly as they said. The Archduke has included the third son in the line of succession, and he is currently under the guidance of Sir Aizen, confirmed to be receiving swordsmanship training. Joshua's face contorted with rage. He's truly a stumbling block from start to finish. It's hard enough establishing a support base while being pushed around by my two older brothers. But now the neutral factions have yet another option. In his fury, he tore the white towel from his attendant's hands, his frustration boiling over. He rounded on the servant, his voice a venomous snarl. Would it kill him to just stay stuck in the corner of his room? The butler stammered. Why, young master? You must mind your words. But Joshua was beyond reason. Mind my words. Can I possibly be calm in this situation? What if even the talents I'd barely gathered start to waver? It already makes my blood boil just to have to call Lucian, who is only a few months older than me, brother. Joshua gritted his teeth, his eyes gleaming with a new, dark resolve. I can't just sit still like this. There must be a way. He turned to his butler, his voice deceptively calm. Butler, since Lucian has started learning the sword, he'll need a sparring partner soon, won't he? Prepare 2 sharp swords. Not wooden training swords, but live blades for real combat. A cruel, twisted smile spread across Joshua's face, his eyes alight with malicious intent. A plan was forming, a violent lesson designed to put his inconvenient brother back in his place, permanently. I just need to teach him, he whispered, his voice dripping with menace, that nothing has changed. In the sunlit courtyard, Lucian stood before the legendary sword saint, his words laced with a challenge that was both a question and a promise. What will you do if someone with real talent appears? Someone other than myself? He asked, his tone confident. A sly smile graced his lips as he continued, anticipating Eisen's skepticism. It may take time to find them, but they will be worth the wait. A man with enough talent to one day leave a scar on you, Sir Eisen. Lucian's bold claim hung in the air, a notion so audacious it seemed to defy reality itself. He imagined finding a prodigy capable of such a feat, even if it took a century. The sword saint stood in silence, his expression unreadable, processing the sheer audacity of the young master's proposition. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Eisen finally broke the silence, his voice low and tinged with concern. My heart feels heavy, as if I am leaving a burden on you, young master. But Lucian merely offered a reassuring smile. I'm content enough knowing you favor this old man. Please do not worry about this anymore, Eisen replied, accepting the boy's strange request for the moment. Lucian watched him, his mind racing, convinced the sword saint thought his plan was nothing but nonsense. Lucian's gaze hardened with secret conviction. As expected, he must consider it nonsense, he thought. It's only natural for him to doubt me, since I've only just begun my training. Still, a predatory smile spread across his face, a look that promised a spectacular revelation. He met Eisen's gaze and whispered, a silent vow to himself and a challenge to his teacher. Still, you can look forward to it. Lucian's mind drifted to the core of his grand strategy, a vision of cosmic destiny. If I was chosen and sent by heaven, and even the sword saint acknowledges that, then it means heaven must have sent someone else, too. He pictured another figure, a naturally gifted swordsman meant to be his rival. Despite a slender build and an inferior sword style, he mused, with his talent alone, he has already become the embodiment of a blade that sweeps across the battlefield. The vision sharpened into a brutal, snow-swept battlefield. A lone warrior with violet hair moved like a phantom through a squadron of armored soldiers. His blade was a blur, each swing a whisper of death. Steel armor offered no resistance as his sword found its mark, severing necks and piercing hearts with chilling efficiency. He moved through the carnage, a solitary figure surrounded by the fallen, blood staining the pure white snow around him. This was the man Lucian sought, a warrior of unparalleled natural genius. He was known by a fearsome title that echoed his prowess, the sword demon, Felix. Lucian's vision concluded with his ultimate goal laid bare. He will become my strongest follower, he declared in the depths of his mind, and the disciple who will inherit everything you pass down, sir. The thought faded, and reality returned. Lucian stood in the training hall, a simple wooden sword now in his hand, ready to begin his first lesson with the master he intended to gift with a peerless student. Sir Eisen gestured toward a sturdy wooden training dummy. Before the lesson begins, let's see how much you have achieved, young master, he announced. Perform vertical, horizontal, and diagonal strikes. And if you have practiced circulation as you claim, you should be able to manipulate mana. Show me an attack imbued with that power. Lucian's eyes narrowed, accepting the test. Gripping the wooden hilt, Lucian felt a strange new sensation. This is my first time holding a sword with Lucian's body. The immense power dwelling within him was a tempest he had to carefully control. He had claimed to have prior experience, so he couldn't reveal his true, overwhelming strength, yet he couldn't appear to be a complete amateur. Finding the balance, he took a deep breath, his eyes flaring with concentration. With perfect form that belied a beginner, Lucian executed each command. A flawless vertical strike, a swift, clean horizontal strike, a series of powerful diagonal strikes. Then, for the final test, he began channeling his power. A brilliant blue aura erupted, enveloping the wooden sword as he poured a torrent of mana into the blade. His eyes blazed with golden light as he unleashed the attack. The mana-charged sword met the dummy, and in a blinding flash of energy, the world seemed to explode. A shockwave of pure power tore through the hall, obliterating the target and kicking up a storm of dust and splintered wood. Even Eisen had to shield himself from the sheer force of the blast. As the dust settled, the training dummy was gone, utterly disintegrated. Lucian stood in a ready stance, inwardly critiquing his performance. My movements are a bit unsatisfactory, he thought, but perhaps they're decent for a beginner? He turned to his teacher, a hint of pride in his expression, wondering, I wonder, does Sir Eisen demand more? Eisen stood in complete silence, his face a stony mask. After a long, tense moment, he spoke, his words hitting Lucian like a physical blow. I suspected the young master had ability, but once again, you surprise me. He paused, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. To put it simply, it was pathetic. The declaration left Lucian utterly stunned, his confident smile vanishing. Sir Eisen, what do you mean? Lucian asked, bewildered. The sword sink began to walk toward him. You heard correctly, young master. I don't know the reason, but bad habits fill every swing of your sword. It resembles a mercenary ignoring the fundamentals, struggling desperately just to survive. Eisen's critique was relentless and precise. By focusing only on power and speed, you have lost the balance between your body and mana. Because of that, your sharp blade becomes blunt, and gaps appear in every movement you make. He stopped before Lucian, his eyes piercing. Furthermore, when launching that ultimate attack, how long did it take for the sword to be covered in mana? Lucian considered the question, unaware of the trap. Well, when I channeled the mana, it took around 1 to 2 seconds. The words had barely left his lips when his eyes widened in shock. The 2 seconds he mentioned so casually were a fatal opening. In that instant, a blur of motion brought the cold reality of his mistake home. Before he could even register the movement, Eisen's wooden sword was resting against his throat. The lesson was sharp, swift, and undeniable. Those 1 to 2 seconds, Eisen's voice was a grave whisper, is more than enough time for an enemy to kill you. This lesson should have started with understanding that weight. An enemy will not let that opening pass. A cold sweat trickled down Lucian's face. I only realized when the sword touched my neck, he thought, the arrogance draining from him. A vivid memory of his past life, of his own death, flashed before his eyes. I was a fool. I could have died without even realizing my head had been severed. Yet I thought so calmly instead. The reality of his recklessness was a brutal awakening. Humbled and resolute, Lucian stepped back and bowed his head. I will keep your words in mind. I will fix my habits and mindset first. Sir Eisen nodded, his expression softening slightly as he continued his instruction. Even a talented body cannot do everything. If the body cannot support the mana, energy will be wasted and create gaps, which is an invitation for death. Eisen then demonstrated the true path. To draw out the true power of the sword, internal and external power must form a single, harmonious flow. A vibrant green aura, calm and controlled, enveloped his blade. With a single, fluid motion, he swung his sword at a new training dummy. There was no explosive blast, only a quiet hum of power. The blade passed through the dummy, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire structure dissolved into fine dust, carried away by the air. Eisen lowered his sword, his gaze intense. This is the path of the sword you must walk from now on, young master. A few days passed under the bright sun of the Valdec estate. The tranquil air was shattered by the sharp crack of wooden swords colliding in the training yard. Under the tutelage of the legendary sword saint, Eisen, Lucian's training had begun in earnest, a furious dance of strikes and parries that echoed off the castle walls. Eisen's voice cut through the clash of wood, sharp and precise. Third young master, the flow of mana must not be interrupted. Lucian gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes as he fought to maintain control. Aizen continued, "Is every word a fundamental truth of combat? Just as training the body allows for precise movements, your mana control must reach that same level of refinement." The Sword Saint effortlessly deflected Lucian's blow, demonstrating a higher principle. While reinforcing your entire body, you must leave enough power to circulate separately. This power must be deployed in the right place at the right time. With a focused gaze, Aizen explained, "When these factors mesh together to form a balance, only then will you understand the true power of the sword." Lucian fell back, the lesson sinking deep into his bones. This was a completely different dimension from the brutish fighting he knew from his past life. He steadied his stance, his golden eyes burning with renewed focus, a silent vow to master this new path. A faint, knowing smile touched Aizen's lips. He raised his own wooden sword, and a calm, green aura enveloped it, humming with restrained power. "Now then, apply what you've just learned and try to defend yourself. However, this time, let us introduce a slightly more advanced step." Aizen's demeanor shifted, his presence becoming a mountain of pressure. Consider the enemy's speed and movements, and respond with the appropriate amount of force. With that, he brought the glowing blade down, not as a simple training strike, but as an attack simulating the true weight of battle. Lucian's mind raced, processing the lecture in a split second. The essence of Sir Aizen's teaching is the union of naturalness, like the flow of water. Through this, one minimizes the loss of power to exert maximum force. As the green light descended, Aizen's voice boomed in his mind. "Don't be overwhelmed, look straight at it." There was no fear, only exhilaration. Lucian channeled his own immense mana, a torrent of raw, blue energy erupting from his core and surging into his blade. He met the Sword Saint's attack head-on, unleashing a blinding explosion of power that shook the very foundations of the courtyard. Blue and green energies clashed in a violent vortex. For a tense moment, Lucian's untamed power held its own against Aizen's perfected technique. The two swordsmen were locked in a stalemate, the air crackling with the sheer force of their opposing auras as the courtyard itself seemed to dim under the strain. The maelstrom of energy subsided. Aizen lowered his sword, his expression calm and unreadable, though a glint of approval shone in his eyes. "We can end today's training here," he stated. "Ingrain the sensation you felt today within you. That alone will be enough to make you a first-rate swordsman." The moment the pressure lifted, Lucian's strength gave out. He collapsed to the ground, laughing breathlessly, a mix of pure exhaustion and utter joy washing over him. He looked up at his master, his body aching but his spirit soaring. "Thank you for the lesson." The aftermath of their training was a scene of utter devastation. The stone pavings of the courtyard were shattered and upturned as if struck by a meteor. Servants and groundskeepers moved cautiously through the wreckage, their hushed whispers filled with disbelief as they began the arduous task of clearing the rubble. One of the younger servants paused, his hand to his mouth in shock. "Just what kind of training did he undergo?" he muttered. Another looked on with concern, hoisting a heavy piece of stone. "Will the young master be all right?" The scale of destruction was beyond anything they could have imagined for a simple sparring session. Later, Lucian sat against a cool stone wall inside the manor, his body drained but his mind sharp. A satisfied, weary smile graced his lips. "I somehow managed to survive today's training as well," he thought. Each session with Aizen was like walking through hell, but it was a crucible that was forging him into something new. He flexed his trembling hand, feeling the phantom ache of the wooden sword's hilt. "It's absurd," he mused, "to think this harsh method is ultimately intended to strip away the bad habits of my past life." He accepted the grueling reality. If this was what it took to fix his ingrained flaws, he would endure it without complaint. His awe for Sir Aizen only grew with each passing day. The man was a true master, able to perceive his exact condition and skill level. Eisen would constantly create crises perfectly tailored to push Lucian's limits, providing precise instructions to draw out the correct reaction. Lucian knew he was simply entrusting his body to these teachings, but he could feel his own growth with every fiber of his being. A profound realization dawned on him. Until now, I believed that only the secrets of excellent sword forms were the path to a higher realm. He had never deeply considered the fundamentals: balance, reserve power, and flow. The truly important things had been inside him all along, waiting to be unlocked. His mind drifted back to the source of his flawed instincts, his final battle as a mercenary. He recalled the overwhelming presence of his foe, a caped swordsman of terrifying power. The memory of that man's cold eyes and his final, chilling command, "Die for me," was seared into his soul, the root of his desperate, inefficient fighting style. The clash of steel, the mocking smile of his killer, the shame of his utter defeat, it all came rushing back. In that life, he was nothing before such a monster. He wondered with a bitter pang if they could have even exchanged a few proper blows. That failure was a ghost he was finally learning to exorcise. Returning to the present, Lucian pushed himself up, feeling a fresh surge of energy. It feels a bit shameful to end it like this today, he thought, a familiar battle lust stirring within him. He was eager to test his newfound understanding. Could there be a perfect opponent somewhere? As if the world itself had answered his call, the sound of determined footsteps echoed through the hall. Lucian looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he saw a familiar figure approach. It was his younger brother, Joshua, flanked by his personal butler and a guard, striding forward with a beaming, confident smile. Sir Eisen, who had been meditating, opened his eyes. "Welcome, fourth young master. However, I am currently training the third young master. If you have words for me, please come back later." Joshua's cheerful demeanor didn't falter. "There is no need for that, master." A bead of sweat trickled down the butler's face as Joshua's smile took on a sharp, malicious edge. "The reason I sought this place out," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "is because my brother has finally committed to training. As a younger brother who learned first, I wanted to help. What do you say, Brother Lucian?" Lucian's tired expression vanished, replaced by a slow, predatory grin. The gears in his mind turned, recognizing the thinly veiled challenge for what it was, a perfect opportunity. His internal voice, filled with wicked delight, practically sang, "Wow, a perfect opponent just strolled right in." Sir Eisen turned to the unexpected guest, his voice calm but firm. "Fourth young master, what is the meaning of this?" Joshua put on a bright, cheerful facade, bowing slightly. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he announced his intention to help with the third young master's training, proposing a practical test of mana control. A sly glint appeared in his eyes as he volunteered himself for the role. "I'd like to be that opponent." Joshua continued his charade, spinning a tale of brotherly concern to Sir Eisen. "As you know, master, there hasn't been enough time to interact with my brothers," he said, his voice laced with false sincerity. He portrayed his rude interruption as a rare opportunity for bonding that he simply couldn't pass up, pleading for the Sword Saint's permission. Lucian watched from afar, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He saw Joshua's ploy for what it was, a transparent, almost childish scheme. Helping? Interacting, he thought, his eyes narrowing. The two live blades brought by the butler told the real story. Joshua wasn't here to help. He was here to humiliate and injure him, using the spar to secure his own position in the family hierarchy. The plan was as simple as it was malicious. By framing the duel as helping his older brother, Joshua absolved himself of any potential blame for what was to come. With the legendary Sword Saint as a witness, the spar would be seen as legitimate, adding weight to its outcome. Lucian knew this was a direct challenge to his standing, a blatant attempt to force him out of the line of succession. Sir Eisen clasped his hands, silently weighing the political trap that had been laid. Refusing would put him in an awkward position, and accepting felt like endorsing the fourth young master's scheme. Seeing his master's predicament, Lucian made his move. He stepped forward with newfound resolve, his voice ringing through the hall. "Sir Eisen, please accept my younger brother's proposal." Both Eisen and Joshua were taken aback by his immediate acceptance. Lucian turned to his younger brother, a disarming smile on his face. "Isn't the youngest's heart so commendable?" he began, before his expression sharpened. "Of course, such rude behavior and a mindset that thinks stubbornness will work is something I cannot simply overlook. I will personally educate the immature youngest." With a slight bow, Lucian delivered his final, chilling words to a stunned Joshua. "Today will be the last day your childishness will be indulged. Do not put Sir Eisen in a tough spot anymore." The Sword Saint watched, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He realized Lucian had not only seen through the entire plot, but had chosen to meet the challenge head-on, turning his brother's scheme against him. Sir Eisen let out a heavy sigh. "In the end, blood must unavoidably be shed," he lamented. "If both of you wish it, I will allow it. However, this will be the last spar of this kind, and I will stop it immediately if I judge it to be dangerous." With the terms set, both Lucian and Joshua placed a fist over their heart, formally accepting the duel. The false pleasantries dissolved, replaced by raw, undisguised animosity. Lucian's lips curled back, revealing sharp teeth in a feral grin. "Let's have a wonderful spar, youngest." Joshua's face contorted into a matching mask of malice as he grabbed Lucian's chin. "Haha, sounds good, brother." In the vast, sunlit courtyard of the Valdek estate, the three stood in a triangular formation. Sir Eisen acted as referee, his voice echoing across the stone. "This is not a fight to harm each other, but merely a spar to verify what you've learned," he declared, his gaze shifting between the two brothers. "Both of you have a spar that brings no shame to the name of House Valdek." The brothers took their positions at opposite ends of the dueling circle, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The air grew thick with anticipation. "If you're ready, draw your swords to signal the start," Sir Eisen commanded. In perfect unison, the sharp ring of steel slicing through the air marked the beginning of the confrontation. Joshua's mind was a storm of fury. "Lucian Valdek, since when did you act like a big brother?" Ending every sentence with youngest, youngest. He was barely a few months older, yet acted so condescendingly. Joshua tightened his grip on his sword, his knuckles white. "Fine, let's see if you can keep babbling like that by the end. Blood is irrelevant in our hierarchy. You will learn who is truly above." Lucian calmly observed his brother's seething rage. "What a vicious expression," he noted internally. "I wouldn't make a face like that even if I met a mortal enemy." He gave his own blade a final, reassuring grip. The cool, heavy sensation was a familiar friend, a feeling that had seen him through countless real battles for his life. He took a moment to center himself, his mercenary past flashing in his mind. In those days, he would have used every dirty trick to win without a second thought. But things were different now. "Today, I participate in this spar as the third young master." With the Sword Saint watching his every move, any sword forms from his past life were strictly off limits. Lucian began to walk forward, sizing up his opponent. Although he is insidious, he's still just a child who doesn't know the ways of the world. Joshua sneered, attempting to provoke him. "Where'd your confidence from earlier go? Does it finally feel real now that you're holding an actual sword?" He added with a cruel smirk. "They say accidents happen during spars with real swords, but that only applies when levels are somewhat matched." Joshua offered a final, mocking out. "Still, if you are scared, I can change it to a wooden sword." That was the final straw. Lucian's internal monologue was sharp and decisive. "Right, that would be best. I take back what I said about within reason." His expression hardened into a cold mask as Joshua snarled. "For a disobedient younger brother, a beating is the only cure." Joshua exploded into motion, his feet thundering against the stone as he charged. He moved with a speed and ferocity that betrayed his deep-seated rage, his blade aimed to maim. His eyes glowed with a frightening intensity as he closed the distance. "I will make you regret those words," he screamed. Lucian met the attack, his own sword raised to defend. He knew this wouldn't be simple. As expected, educating him under these restrictions won't be easy. Joshua had also received the Sword Saint's training, and his basics were far from a level that could be taken lightly. The first clash of steel sent sparks flying, a testament to his brother's solid foundation. Lucian quickly assessed his disadvantage. Moreover, I have exhausted most of my mana from the spar with the Sword Saint earlier. Yet, he also saw his opening. However, his lack of experience is unavoidable. Joshua was strong, but he was also predictable, falling for such a light provocation with astonishing ease. The time for defense was over. Lucian poured his remaining energy into his movements, applying the Sword Saint's teachings on power concentration and mana control. A brilliant blue aura enveloped his legs and soared as he dodged Joshua's wild attack, creating a critical opening. I will take control of his split second. Sir Eisen's eyes widened, and the attending servants gasped in shock at the sudden, decisive reversal. Lucian was now on the offensive, his sword arcing down towards his defenseless brother. He bellowed a final, chilling warning, his voice laced with dominance. Grit your teeth and block, or else you'll bite your tongue off. With a final, thundering cry of youngest, Lucian's blade crashed into Joshua's desperate block. The impact was cataclysmic. A blinding flash of light and a deafening boom erupted from the point of contact, unleashing a shockwave that tore across the courtyard, bringing the duel to a spectacular and definitive end. The aftershocks of the duel between Lucian and Joshua radiated from the training grounds, spreading through the grand estate like wildfire. What began as a private, vicious challenge quickly became the talk of the entire family. Every servant, knight, and noble under the mansion's roof would soon hear of the impossible outcome. Whispers echoed through the opulent halls as two butlers spoke in hushed, animated tones. One recounted the unbelievable story that young Lord Lucian, the family's disappointment, had utterly overwhelmed Joshua. His companion scoffed in disbelief, arguing that Lucian had only just begun his training. But the first butler insisted, delivering the detail that lent the tale its undeniable weight. The Sword Saint himself had been present to witness it all. In the servants' quarters, the story took on even more colorful details. The maids giggled amongst themselves, recounting how the fourth young master, Joshua, had marched to the training grounds brimming with confidence, only to return looking as if he'd attended his own funeral. One even heard that the proud young master had been seen shedding tears of humiliation. Of course, as with all gossip, the facts were quickly becoming embellished by speculation and drama. The estate staff, hungry for a first-hand account, swarmed the few who had been present. Aide Hugo, the Sword Saint's escort, was cornered by eager butlers, while a young servant named Hans found himself the center of the maid's attention. They pleaded for the details, wanting to know if it was true that even the legendary Sir Eisen had recognized Lucian's talent. Hugo, aware of the political implications, stroked his chin, carefully considering what secrets were safe to share. Hans, however, felt no such restraint. With wide, excited eyes, he launched into a theatrical retelling of the event. He told them of the moment young Master Lucian completely subdued Joshua, and how, in a final act of dominance, he brought back his defeated brother's sword as a trophy. The maids gasped, captivated by the dramatic flair of his story. But only a select few knew the truth. This entire sequence of events was not a coincidence, but the calculated execution of a single person's scheme. In his study, Lucian hummed a cheerful tune, a stark contrast to the chaos he had unleashed. He looked out the window, a sly smirk playing on his lips as he licked his thumb. It was perfect weather, he thought, for rumors to spread and for a new order to take root. His mind drifted back to the climax of the duel. He remembered the look of pure terror on Joshua's face as he loomed over him, his voice dripping with condescending power as he called him by his least favorite title, youngest. Joshua, desperate and broken, stammered, "Be brother?" Lucian's grin widened into a predatory sneer as he raised his sword. "Am I only your brother at times like this?" he mocked, his eyes glowing with an unnerving light. Joshua's pride finally shattered completely, replaced by primal fear. He screamed a desperate, panicked apology, his voice echoing across the now silent courtyard. In response, Lucian brought his blade down with a deafening crash. But the strike wasn't aimed at flesh. With a final, explosive impact, his sword met Joshua's, and the fourth young master's blade splintered into pieces, a perfect symbol of his utter and absolute defeat. Leaning in close to the trembling boy, Lucian's voice was a low, menacing whisper. "Joshua, if you pull a stunt like this again, know that it really won't be fun then." He punctuated his threat by grabbing his brother by the collar, forcing their eyes to meet. "Learn to distinguish where to step and where not to, and behave yourself. If you understood," he hissed, his grip tightening, "you should nod your head, right?" Back in the present, Lucian turned from the window, his expression one of calm satisfaction. With Joshua's public humiliation, the other arrogant young masters would surely be quiet for a while, giving him the peace he needed. His gaze fell upon a letter on his desk, his mind already shifting to the next, far larger battlefield. With the internal matters settled, it was time to turn his attention to the family's external enemies, House Logran. In a sun-drenched conservatory, the family patriarch, Lord Valdemar, reviewed the same intelligence. He tapped the secret message received from Hugo as Lucian entered, standing at attention. Lucian confirmed the report. In 1 week, an agent was scheduled to make contact with a figure from the rival House Logran. The clandestine meeting was set to take place in the Vestra territory, right under their noses. Lord Valdemar considered the location, tapping the table thoughtfully. The Vestra territory. How absurd. Lucian explained the enemy's logic, noting that while the territory was close, it had lost its strategic function, making it the perfect blind spot. His father conceded the point. It was a brazen move, done with the belief that their gaze wouldn't reach such a forgotten corner of their own domain. The patriarch leveled a piercing gaze at his son. "So, what is your intention in reporting this to me? I thought I entrusted this entire matter to you." Lucian met his father's stare without hesitation, his response simple and direct. "I need power." The Lord's eyes widened slightly, intrigued and somewhat surprised by the blunt request. Lucian presented his reasoning through a stark metaphor. He had found the beast, an eagle ensnared in a trap of thorns, but that discovery was meaningless on its own. "Just because a beast is caught in a trap," he explained coolly, "it doesn't mean I have the tools to hunt the beast." He had come to his father, the one person who held all the tools, the authority, and the resources to ensure the kill. Lord Valdemar took a slow sip of tea, his expression unreadable. He saw the cold logic in his son's words, but also a flaw in his character. "Contrary to your words about establishing merit, it sounds like you only intend to ride on my back." He slammed his fist down, his voice laced with disappointment. "A hunter earns a name only when he catches the prey with his own strength. If you cannot do it yourself, it is nothing more than a half-measure accomplishment." The Lord's voice grew colder, his disappointment sharpening into a harsh lecture. "I gave you not only the opportunity but the authority to resolve it yourself, yet you choose safety over the challenge." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Lucian, demanding justification for what he saw as a weak-willed decision. "Is that the best choice you could make? Answer me, Lucian." Lucian stood unmoved, his own resolve hardening under his father's intense scrutiny. The air crackled with unspoken tension as their philosophies clashed. Then, with a gaze as sharp and unyielding as polished steel, Lucian gave his answer. "If I can complete the hunt by doing so, I will gladly choose that path." He began to walk, articulating his own brutal, pragmatic worldview. "The royal path you speak of can only be walked by those who already possess power. To thrust the spear yourself while the people tremble in the shadow of the beast is not bravery, but recklessness that will eventually cost you their trust." He turned back to his father, his voice ringing with conviction. "I believe the essence of the hunt lies not in the catching, but in protecting. And if I can certainly eliminate the threat, does it truly matter if it's treated as a half measure?" The aftermath of the duel was not a quiet affair. Like a shockwave, news of the confrontation between Lucian and Joshua spread throughout the sprawling family estate, shaking the very foundations of the established hierarchy. What was once whispered in fear was now discussed with a mix of awe and disbelief. In the opulent, high-ceilinged halls, servants paused their duties to trade gossip. The rumor was almost too fantastic to be believed that young Master Lucian, the quiet third son, had utterly overwhelmed the arrogant and talented Joshua. One servant dismissed it as nonsense, certain that a novice like Lucian could never achieve such a feat, but his companion quickly corrected him, adding a crucial detail that lent the story undeniable weight. The Sword Saint himself had supervised the entire match. The story was the same in the bustling kitchens, where maids recounted the tale with dramatic flair. They spoke of how the fourth young master, Joshua, had arrived full of confidence, only to leave looking completely miserable, with some even claiming he had shed tears of humiliation. The reason the story spread so quickly and became so vividly exaggerated was no accident. Two key figures, aide Hugo and the servant Hans, found themselves at the center of the swirling rumors. Eager for details, others pressed them for the truth of what happened. Leaning in as if sharing a top secret, Hans painted a wild, dramatic picture for his audience, his eyes wide with feigned shock. He claimed Lucian had not only overpowered Joshua, but had even taken his sword as a trophy of his complete and utter victory. But what few would ever know was that this meticulously crafted narrative, with all its subtle exaggerations and perfectly timed revelations, was the scheme of a single person. Elsewhere, Lucian stood alone, humming a cheerful tune. He licked his lips with a satisfied smirk, basking in his success. It was, he thought to himself, a perfect day to spread some rumors. His mind drifted back to the immediate aftermath of the duel, replaying the moment of his triumph. He remembered his chilling whisper to his defeated sibling. "You should consider yourself lucky it ended there, little brother." Joshua, still reeling from the shock, could only stammer in confusion. Lucian's expression in the memory had been a terrifying mask of dominance, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He had loomed over Joshua, mocking his sudden change in tone. "I'm only your brother when you're cornered, huh?" Driven by fear, Joshua had let out a desperate, pleading scream. "I am sorry, Brother Lucian." But mercy was not on the agenda. With a swift, contemptuous motion, Lucian had brought the flat of his blade down, not on Joshua, but on the sword he held. The sharp crack of shattering steel echoed across the courtyard as Joshua's prized weapon broke into pieces on the ground, a symbol of his broken pride. Leaning in close, Lucian's voice had dropped to a venomous whisper, his face a twisted, menacing grin. "Joshua, pull another stunt like this, and things will get really ugly. Learn your place and act accordingly." He grabbed Joshua's face, forcing him to meet his gaze. "If you understand me, nod." Returning to the present, Lucian smiled, pleased with his work. The calculated humiliation of Joshua and the subsequent rumors would surely keep the other ambitious young masters in line for a while. With the internal power struggles temporarily settled, he turned his attention to a more pressing matter, looking down at a letter on his desk. It was time to deal with the house of Marquis Rogran. Lucian stood before his father, the Duke, in a sun-drenched conservatory. He had just presented the intelligence gathered by his aide, Hugo. "So this is the secret letter you received," the Duke mused, his hand resting on the document. Lucian confirmed, explaining the Marquis's plan. In 1 week, in the Vestra territory, he was scheduled to make contact with a member of the Rogran faction. The Duke tapped the table, his expression hardening. "The Vestra territory. Preposterous." Lucian agreed, elaborating that the Marquis likely chose the location precisely because it was so close to their own domain of Kelheim. A brazen move, made in the belief that it would be a blind spot, an act of defiance they would never expect right under their noses. The Duke leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he sized up his son. "Right, and what is your underlying motive for reporting this to me? I thought I left this entire matter in your hands." Lucian met his father's gaze without flinching, his answer direct and honest. "I need power." Lucian elaborated with a powerful metaphor. "Just because a beast is caught in a trap," he explained, as an image of a great eagle ensnared by thorny vines filled his mind, "doesn't mean I have the tools to hunt it." His father nodded slowly, understanding the implication. "So you came to me, the one who holds the tools." The Duke picked up his teacup, his tone becoming sharp and dismissive. It could be called a rational judgment, but contrary to your claim of wanting to prove yourself, it only sounds like you're trying to ride my coattails." He gestured broadly, his voice laced with disappointment. A hunter only makes a name for himself when he takes down his prey with his own strength. If you can't do it yourself, it's nothing more than a half-baked accomplishment. His voice grew colder, his disappointment sharpening into a harsh lecture. "I gave you not only the opportunity but the authority to resolve it yourself, yet you choose safety over the challenge." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Lucian, demanding justification for what he saw as a weak-willed decision. "Is this really the best you can do? Answer me, Lucian." Lucian stood unmoved, his own resolve hardening under his father's intense scrutiny. The air crackled with unspoken tension as their philosophies clashed. Then, with a gaze as sharp and unyielding as polished steel, Lucian gave his answer. "If taking that path ensures the hunt is completed, I will gladly take it." He began to walk, articulating his own brutal, pragmatic worldview. "The royal path you speak of can only be walked by those who already possess power. To thrust the spear yourself while the people tremble in the shadow of the beast is not bravery, but recklessness that will eventually cost you their trust. I believe the essence of the hunt lies not in the catching, but in protecting." Turning back to face his father, his voice rang with conviction. "If I can definitively eliminate the threat, why should I care if my achievement is seen as half-baked?" He paused, carefully plucking a single rose from a vase. "Of course, this doesn't mean I plan on playing the saint. It's just that if the person I yielded the credit to can no longer draw their bow, the one destined to inherit that bow is already set in stone." As Lucian finished, he let the rose fall from his fingers. A heavy silence filled the conservatory. The Duke remained still for a long moment, processing his son's words. Finally, a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "That answer is sufficient." A faint smile touched the Duke's lips as he picked up his tea. "I can't even remember the last time someone refuted me to my face like this," he mused aloud. He took a slow sip, his eyes gleaming with newfound respect. "That was a good answer, Lucian. A man must have conviction in the path he walks. You can accomplish nothing if you're swayed by a single word." Lucian, realizing the true nature of their conversation, asked, "Was that a test?" His father confirmed it was. He wanted to see if Lucian would waver in the face of his authority. After all, who would trust a leader who couldn't even protect their own convictions? Such a person would be unfit to lead a family, unworthy of being called a man. Lucian let out a quiet sigh of relief. He had suspected his father knew the task was beyond his current capabilities, but he hadn't understood the reason for his unyielding pressure until now. There were no easy shortcuts with him. Still, the conversation had gone well. Lucian pressed his advantage. "Father, in that case, regarding the support for this operation?" The Duke nodded. "I will lend you the tools you need. Considering the situation, mobilizing a large force is out of the question." He understood that their enemies would also move with a small, elite force to avoid detection. Lucian smiled, seeing his opening. "That's correct, Father. So if possible, some skilled knights from within the family." The Duke cut him off, his voice suddenly grave. "Will that really be enough?" He leaned forward, his expression intense, making a declaration that would change everything. "I will lend you the Black Lion. Experience for yourself the true weight of the one sitting in this seat." 1 week later, Lucian and Hugo arrived in the desolate town of Vestra. A heavy, gray sky hung over the ruins of what was once a bustling transit city. Surveying the crumbling infrastructure and silent streets, Lucian noted the profound lack of human presence, a chilling emptiness that was far worse than the reports had described. Hugo observed that the city, despite its proximity to the capital of Kelheim, was now nothing more than a ghost town for vagrants. Lucian, his hood pulled low, walked with purpose through the wreckage. He explained that this very decay and isolation made it the perfect, unnoticed location for their enemy's clandestine manufacturing site. Hugo, ever the loyal attendant, turned to his master with a lingering question. He pressed Lucian, asking how he had obtained such detailed intelligence about their enemy's plans, a feat that had even eluded the family's spies. With a cryptic smile, Lucian deferred the explanation, urging Hugo to focus on the imminent hunt and the prey they were about to corner. Reassured by Lucian's confidence, Hugo confirmed that the trap had been set perfectly. Inside the targeted manufacturing site, everything was arranged to match the false reports they had leaked, with decoy goods and supplies in place. All preparations were complete. Now, all that remained was to await the arrival of their promised reinforcements. Lucian noticed a hint of unease in his attendant's demeanor and questioned if he was bothered by their reliance on the Duke's support. Hugo quickly denied it, acknowledging the gravity of the mission required every possible advantage. However, he couldn't hide his personal regret, clenching a fist as he lamented his own lack of strength, wishing he could have been powerful enough to handle this and give the entire achievement to his young master. Sensing his attendant's earnest frustration, Lucian placed a comforting hand on Hugo's shoulder. He spoke with a wisdom beyond his years, explaining that their journey had only just begun. Like a small boat setting sail on a vast ocean, they could not afford to let impatience blind them and steer them from their true course. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Lucian playfully patted Hugo's cheek, remarking that he had a long future ahead, having only just turned 30. Hugo's expression hardened as he stoically corrected his master, stating he was only 23. The sudden reveal that there was hardly an age gap between them left Lucian utterly speechless, a bead of sweat tracing its way down his face. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the cawing of a distant crow. Lucian, flustered, tried to backtrack, but Hugo waved it off, telling him not to correct his mistake as it would only make him feel worse. The brief moment of levity served as a strange calm before the impending storm. Suddenly, the air grew tense. A flock of birds took flight in a startled cacophony, signaling that the promised time was at hand. As Hugo scanned the empty courtyard, wondering where their allies were, the atmosphere shifted. Both he and Lucian snapped to attention, their eyes widening as they felt an overwhelming presence descend upon them. In a blur of motion, a figure appeared from the shadows, lunging at Hugo with a dagger. Reacting on instinct, Hugo drew his sword to block, but the attack was far too fast. The assailant stopped the dagger just short of his throat, catching the blade with an armored hand. A chilling voice echoed in the silence, condemning the block as absurdly slow. Hugo stared in disbelief, his body trembling. The assailant's speed had surpassed the limits of human perception, and his sword was held fast, completely neutralized by the man's grip. He had never been so effortlessly overpowered, subdued in an instant by a force he couldn't even comprehend. Lucian's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady. "It's all right, Hugo. He is not our enemy." Stepping forward, he addressed the mysterious attacker directly, his gaze sharp and questioning. "But to direct killing intent at us. What are you after?" The man's face, half shrouded in shadow, stared back as he gave a one-word answer: Black Lion. Hugo's mind raced, connecting the dots with dawning shock. The reinforcements his master had mentioned, could they be the rumored Black Lion? The legendary special forces of House Waldeck, a force shrouded in myth and secrecy, were standing before them. The Black Lion. They were the ultimate shadow force, an elite unit that handled all of House Waldeck's most covert and dangerous operations. They moved in absolute secrecy, their loyalty sworn only to the head of the family. As Lucian confirmed Hugo's suspicion, more cloaked figures materialized from the shadows, silent and imposing. The leader of the unit, a man with steel-gray hair and an aura of immense power, stood before Lucian and placed a fist over his heart. "We greet the third young master," he declared, his voice a low rumble. He explained that the earlier assault was merely a test to observe his attendant's reaction, confirming the Black Lion held no true hostile intent. Lucian remained composed, but internally, he was reeling. The ghost stories about this unit were no exaggeration. Even with his guard raised, he hadn't sensed their approach at all. Now, standing right in front of him, they suppressed their presence so perfectly that they were like phantoms. These were not men, they were monsters. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Lucian's face. He finally understood the depth of his father's conviction. The Duke hadn't just provided support. He had deployed the most powerful weapon in the family's arsenal. This was an overwhelming, undeniable display of trust and expectation. Inside their makeshift headquarters, Lucian briefed the assembled operatives. He informed them that the Logran faction had taken the bait and their leader was on his way. His orders were cold and precise. Capture the one in charge alive. You may kill everyone else. They crossed the line, so there's no need for mercy. Lucian concluded the briefing, leaving the final judgment and execution of the plan to the Black Lion's commander. The commander watched the young master, his mind reassessing everything he thought he knew. He had assumed the Duke's decision was merely a test, but Lucian's unshakable composure and tactical assessment proved he was more than worthy of this command. The commander felt a profound shift, realizing that a new wind was blowing through House Waldeck. With newfound respect and conviction, he turned to his men. "We will follow your orders," he declared to Lucian, his unit echoing his resolute commitment as they bowed in unison. As twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and red, a decadent carriage rolled through the desolate streets of Vestra. Inside, Philip Logran, the arrogant second son of the Logran family, grumbled about the disgustingly boring journey. He declared that if not for his father's direct orders, he would never have set foot in such a wretched place. Stepping out of the carriage, Philip pressed a handkerchief to his nose, disgusted by the very air. He urged his attendants to finish their business quickly so they could return to the comfort of the main house. Crumpling the cloth in his fist, his face twisted in a sneer, completely unaware that he had just walked into a perfectly laid trap.